And we're live.
Very good. We will now resume our regular council meeting of the Township of Monaghan. We do have reports coming back from closed. The first one, I'd look for a mover and a seconder, that council approved the final 2022 Library Board operating levy with the release of the remaining balance, 1/3 of the operating levy request. As council has received and reviewed the additional information related to the library as requested in motion R 2022-081 from February 22nd, 2020. Moved by Councillor Shaw, seconded by Councillor Belch. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Belch.
Yes.
Mayor McFadden.
Yes.
Councillor Huntley.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham.
Yes.
And Councillor Shaw.
Yes.
Motion is approved. And the other report coming back is that council directs staff to issue the request for proposal for the sale and redevelopment of 1066 Sire Line substantially in accordance with the terms outlined with RFP CS 22-01, and that council direct the clerk to report back to council in August 2022 with a recommendation on the award of the request for proposal. Motion by Councillor Belch and Deputy Mayor Graham. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Shaw.
Yes.
Councillor Belch.
Yes.
Mayor McFadden.
Yes.
Councillor Huntley.
Yes.
And Deputy Mayor Graham.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Presentations. Our first presentation, item 7.1, Imad Alvi, Asset Management Consultant, PSD City Inc. 2022 Asset Management Plan, Township of Monaghan. Madam Clerk, I'll wait for you to let Imad Alvi in. Very good. Welcome. How are you?
Good. Thank you, Mayor. How are you?
Very good. All right. Floor is yours. And Madam Clerk, is the presentation already up?
Perfect. Thank you. And through you, Mayor, to councilors, hope everybody's doing well. Thank you for the introduction. And thank you for inviting me today. My name is Imad Alvi, and I am the primary consultant that has been working with the township and township staff to develop this asset management plan. And I'm excited to be able to bring it to you forward today. And just before I get started, I wanted to express my appreciation for your staff. They have really put in a lot of time, effort, and commitment to be able to develop and present to you with this AMP. This also includes dealing with me and my constant revisions. So I acknowledge that, and I do appreciate the patience, and kudos to them. Next slide, please. Next slide again. And before diving into the specifics of the AMP, I wanted to provide an overview and context on the project and asset management in general. So previously, the Township of Monaghan and PSD Citywide have collaborated quite a bit in the past, including an AMP that was done in 2013. And for our current project, we aim to develop an updated asset management plan that was compliant with the first leg of OREG 588. I'll talk more about those in a second. And as part of the current project, we went through several workshops covering the areas that you see on the screen: inventory data refinement, risk and criticality analysis, lifecycle framework development, and levels of service, as well as a consistent back and forth with staff and our team here to revise the inventory and kind of bring it to the current stage. Next slide, please. So if I can take a step back and ask the initial question of why the need for municipal asset management. Well, as a starting point, we can acknowledge that municipal infrastructure assets are vital for communities. And from our perspective, we need a way to organize what we own, a way to understand what services we provide through those assets, and a way to ensure accountability to our residents and stakeholders for the services that they use through those assets. So these three key objectives are really the driving force behind not only the regulation, but the increased awareness among various stakeholders on the need for asset management. Next slide, please. So let's bring in some context and take a look at some national findings. The 2019 Canadian Infrastructure Report Card found that across Canada, a large proportion of municipal infrastructure is in fair condition, and that the majority of the infrastructure is more than 20 years old, and that stormwater infrastructure is the most unknown. And what we mean by unknown is that it has the most data gaps and quite a bit of missing data. Next slide. So comparing the asset portfolio of Canada or the national portfolio with the township, we can see that Cavan Monaghan is in a similar position as other municipalities and faces the same critical issues like aging infrastructure, climate change and extreme weather, and general market trends that have seen a downturn the past few months and then will continue to be volatile the next few years. Next slide, please. Thanks. So in our case, and as ISO 55000 defines asset management, it is the coordinated activity of an organization to realize value from assets. So like I said, from our perspective, the value is the level of service that we are providing to our residents. And we have a high level set of parameters that we can use to determine the level of service of a particular system or network. And that's there on the screen. So starting with the cost of how much will it cost the township to replace or repair an asset? And when will this cost be required? Performance. So how well is the asset performing? What is its current output or condition? And risk. What is the potential risk of this asset failing? Who will be impacted if this asset fails? And are we able to identify high risk assets? So next slide, please. So with these kind of three key parameters in mind on exactly what is asset management, the other kind of area I wanted to cover and just kind of bring into light is that asset management in general is a comprehensive and should be spread throughout the organization, starting with the asset portfolio, working its way up to the management of the organization. So what do I mean by asset portfolio? As the name says, and as you probably all know, the asset portfolio would refer to the asset inventory. The key recommendation here, and it's mentioned in the A&P as well as my presentation today, is that there is a strong need to establish a centralized asset inventory that is agreed upon by stakeholders from finance to public works and has the critical data points that we need to identify the three high-level parameters that I mentioned in my slide before. So risk, cost, and performance, as well as critical data points that are needed to help in decision-making, accurate capital forecasting, and just basic asset management. Next slide, please. So what you see there on the screen is a typical asset management framework. And as part of our project, we went through kind of the three key sections already, but there's quite a bit left in each of the three sections. I'll quickly just talk about each. So the first stage was assess. So we went through kind of an overview on the current state of the infrastructure. Part of that was also the planning stage where we identified data gaps, and where possible, we consolidated critical asset data like condition assessments, attribute data, or just missing asset records or segments. And then finally, the last stage of implementation, where we went through and developed the asset management plan that has been presented before you. Next slide, please. So with that in perspective, let's talk a little bit about asset management at the township. Like I mentioned before, the township did develop and produce an A&P in 2013. But at that time, it was relying primarily on historical indexing, and the asset inventory at that time was more finance-based. So when I say finance-based, I mean it was geared more towards satisfying the requirements of PSAP 3150, which essentially regulated that all municipalities maintain a tangible capital asset inventory, make sure the amortization schedule is current and all adjustments are indicated in the inventory. The A&P we're presenting today is more comprehensive with additional asset categories and asset data from various data sources. It also uses accurate replacement costing methods rather than historical cost indexing where possible. And we consolidated critical condition data from condition assessments. I believe the most recent condition assessment that we did incorporate into the A&P was the 2020 road need study. Next slide, please. So all of that coming together, and with the completion of this A&P, the township is at a really good starting point to establish a centralized asset inventory that should now contain, or does contain, the 4 key items I mentioned before, and then the 4 key items you see there on the screen. The TCA, which is the original tangible capital asset inventory, which is the kind of the origin point of decentralized asset inventory, again, derived from PSAP 3150. And now the other piece we've added on are condition assessments, the most recent being the 2020 road needs study. And as part of our project, we've also gone ahead and developed life cycle models and risk models for your core assets and high level for your non-core assets. And then finally, as part of our project also, we worked, collaborating with staff, consultants, and general market data. Next slide, please. So that brings us now to the actual, the OREG 588 regulation, as well as its timeline. With the completion of this AMP, the township has achieved full compliance with the first leg of the Ontario regulation, which is due this year in July 1st, 2022. I will say in this matter, the township has gone ahead and done an inventory analysis of non-core assets also, which is something that is not required in 2024, but it does greatly help in identifying deficiencies and data gaps well before that timeline. So that puts us in really good shape for 2024. And I should also clarify that core assets means roads, bridges, culverts, bridges and structural culverts, water, wastewater, and stormwater. Non-core assets mean buildings and facilities, parks and land improvements, machinery, equipment, and vehicle assets. So you can see the difference there. So for this year, the first AMP that's due is in obviously this year, and it only covers core assets. But like I said, we've gone ahead and also included non-core for us to get a better understanding of where the non-core assets are and in preparation for 2024 requirements. I won't go through the exact list of requirements there, but you can see that at a high level, what it's basically requesting is for us to identify the current state of the infrastructure. So how much it costs, what the current condition is, and the general forecast of replacement and rehabilitation, as well as what the current approach to life cycle management is that the township conducts and implements to maintain the level of service that you're currently providing. And then also the cost of those life cycle activities. There's also a brief discussion on population and employment forecasts and the discussion of growth impacts on the infrastructure, as well as the current levels of service. Now, I will say, according to OREG, the current levels of service for core assets have been provided. These are the minimum requirements or KPIs that the township must determine and then produce in the AMP. And so that's for core assets. For 2024, the requirements stay the same, except this time it's now includes non-core assets. So again, like I said, we're a little bit ahead of that because we've already identified we've done an inventory analysis of non-core assets at this stage. And then for 2025, it's again an AMP with all assets, but this time the township should indicate the proposed levels of service for the next 10 years, and an updated inventory analysis, and then a more robust lifecycle management strategy, as well as a financial strategy to address the shortfalls between getting to that proposed levels of service relative to the current levels of service. And then lastly, a discussion of how growth assumptions are impacting the lifecycle and financial strategy. So even in this scenario, I will say with this AMP, we've also included, again, a financial strategy that while it's not required for this year, it does allow the township to plan ahead and plan better. Next slide, please. So what happens after 2025? Well, the regulation requires that all AMPs, all asset management plans, must be updated at least once every 5 years. And every municipal council shall conduct an annual review of its asset management progress on or before July 1st. And that the AM policy and asset management plan be posted on the municipal website. And I believe that's already done in the township's case. The 2013 AMP has been posted well before. Next slide, please. So bringing it all back to the actual document, again, the primary kind of key objectives were to answer the 3 questions there on the screen. what is the current state of municipal infrastructure, what process improvements can increase confidence in analysis and decision-making, and what is the township's financial capacity to meet long-term capital requirements. Next slide, please. So I'll go through at a high level, just covering the entire asset portfolio. We're looking at a total valuation of about 215 million, which puts it as 14,457 per $100,000 worth of current value assessment, with sanitary being the highest, followed by the road network, which is fairly typical, and then that's following, which is followed by buildings and facilities, water, fleet, land improvements, and stormwater. Next slide, please. One key thing we wanted to highlight is the type of replacement cost methodology we used for this AMP. So 67% of the assets are using defined replacement costing, which basically means there is a established unit cost that was allocated to these assets, and then their costing was determined. Some of this was from staff input, some of this was from the reports that we were referencing, and some of it was regional industry standards. 33% of the assets are using historical cost indexing. So again, that's more just inflating the existing historical costs to get, the current value today, which, as I'm sure everybody's aware, is not as accurate as getting actual costing. So that's another key kind of point there. The accuracy and reliability of life cycle costs is critical for asset management, and which is why I'm happy to see that it's about 67%. So more than half are using defined replacement costing. Next slide, please. In terms of the overall condition of the asset portfolio, about 62% of the assets in the asset portfolio of the township are in fair or better condition. And next slide, please. Which brings us to another kind of key point, the type of condition data that we used. So age-based condition data, which is typically just using the estimated useful life of an asset with the install date or when the asset was put in service. That condition, the condition that is derived from those two factors typically is overstated and overstates needs and an overall deficit. So assessed condition data, which in the AMP we mean condition data that has gone through an actual condition assessment either through an external consultant or through staff, is I'd say a lot more accurate than age-based condition data. So assessed condition data does builds confidence in decision making and kind of helps you identify deficiencies more accurately than age-based condition data. So in our portfolio, we found that 38% of assets do have assessed condition data, with the majority of them coming from the majority of which is coming from the road network through the road needs study. And then for other critical asset categories, we went through staff assessment. So staff provided their input as well as our consultant input as well. So you'll see that 38% of assets do have assessed condition data, but that leaves quite a bit of assets that are relying on age-based. Next slide, please. So the need for assessed condition data, again, is given pretty self-explanatory, but if I can just cover the three key points there. It does cover and allow you to mitigate the risks that are associated with asset failure. So undergoing a condition assessment allows you to identify assets that are in a very poor condition or poor condition, and obviously take the necessary steps to mitigate their failure. As well as that, it also helps you identify the most economic intervention. So if you're assessing a road, for example, rather than doing an expensive rehabilitation, maybe there's a scenario where you can use some preventative maintenance activity, such as a slurry seal program or any kind of, I'd say cost-effective activity. And then finally, with that assessed condition data, we're able to predict, future expenditure requirements more accurately. You'll know exactly not exactly when the asset will fail, but you'll have a higher degree of certainty than you would have if you were just using age-based condition. Next slide, please. So the overall asset age of the portfolio, I'll say 16% of assets are over 25 years old. Next slide. And generally 54% of assets will require replacement in the next 10 years. Now, one thing I want to highlight, and we've had discussions with staff before this, is that all of this is reliant on the inventory data itself. So this is why I keep saying this, and I will continue to say this. It is really important that the inventory data is accurate and is kept up to date and is reflective of what staff are experiencing in the field, and it is accurate and legitimate with data gaps populated or addressed. Because even the useful life remaining and the condition graphs that you see that you've seen now, and you're seeing the useful life remaining graph, all of that is reliant on the infrastructure or the asset inventory that we have in the system. So the more accurate that inventory is, the more accurate your forecasting will be, the more accurate your overall output and your reports will be. So a key recommendation that we give in the A&P, and I'll give again in this presentation, is the need to maintain a high quality inventory with the data points that we need for forecasting, as well as to get a better understanding and overview of the current infrastructure. Next slide, please. So with the overview of the infrastructure, we went ahead and started developing two kind of frameworks. So first would be lifecycle frameworks for your core assets. And in a nutshell, they were designed to document and formalize the township's current approach to how they manage the roads, water, wastewater, and storm. And again, as everybody is aware, costs to rehabilitate increase towards end of life. So it is always, prudent to do preventative maintenance activities early on so that you're spending less. And another point there is that timely intervention leads to lower total life cycle costs, again, which can be done through condition assessments, and even just having a formal life cycle model, which then allows you to say, all right, for this particular road, we're going to be doing a slurry seal next, and then we'll do kind of an assessment to see where we are at a later kind of predefined date, according to the framework. Next slide, please. So another benefit of having your life cycle framework and strategies be formalized is that it does allow you to show and illustrate the cost benefit of doing the right thing at the right time. In the example there, we formalized the framework for LCB road surfaces. So you'll see that if we were to do nothing, the road surface of an LCB road would kind of fail close to 10 years or as the expected useful life, needing us to have an annual requirement to maintain the level of service on LCB roads be about 4.5 million. But with the activities that the township is currently doing, like a slurry seal treatment or surface treatments, we are able to extend the life of the asset out by more than double, I'd say about 23 to 24 years, and overall have a cost benefit of about 2.4 million. Next slide, please. The other framework that we developed and have now loaded into the system and is part of the A&P as well as the township's central asset inventory is the risk framework and risk models, detailed models for your core assets, and then high-level risk models for your non-core assets. So basically, the frameworks in question were kind of determined based on the equation there. So you'll see that the probability of failure multiplied by the consequence of failure is your defined risk. So we use several data points to determine the probability of failure, and then several data points to determine the consequence of failure, which then ultimately produced a risk rating that we could then rank and classify each asset based on the risk that the equation provided. Some of the data points that we did use were asset condition, pipe material for your linear underground assets, service life remaining for assets that didn't have assessed condition data. And then for your consequence of failure, we use replacement cost as a data point, pipe diameter for your underground water, wastewater, stormwater assets, AADT for your roads, and then number of lanes for your roads. Now, these aren't all of the data points we use. These are just some examples, but hoping you get the idea here. So with that risk model applied to every asset, next slide, please. We were able to generate a risk matrix for your entire asset portfolio. So the benefit of this is that it allows you to identify high risk assets right away, allowing you to even just simply click on a couple and go right to the top right there. You'll see 12 assets. You can click on it and go right to the assets in question and then investigate them further. So a good risk model will assist in prioritizing resources and applying them to the right asset at the right time. Next slide, please. Which will then lead you and allow you to operationalize the risk framework itself and just operationalize risk. So again, with that risk matrix in mind, you can kind of put together a list of activities and you have your assets identified. So if your assets are, have a high consequence of failure and they're also likely to fail, then immediate action is required, whether it's just a simple inspection or an outright rehabilitation or replacement. And if your assets are, highly likely to fail, but the consequence of the failing is not as severe, then maybe it's simple just to monitor and predict their failure. On the other hand, if you have assets that are less likely or least likely to fail, but if they were to fail would be of a significant consequence, then of course we can take proactive management steps like preventative maintenance and monitoring to make sure that we're aware of the asset condition and asset performance. And then finally, just routine monitoring for assets that are, least likely to fail, and if they were to fail, would have minimal consequences. Next slide, please. So with these kind of strategies formalized in the citywide database and the Township Central Asset Inventory, as well as the consolidation of data points and assessed condition data from various data sources, we were able to produce forecasts for, we did it for the A&P, we did 10 years as required, and then we also did longer term forecasts to illustrate the overall life, one replacement cycle of the entire system. So on the screen there, you see that 10 years forecast. And I know that that particular 2026 jump is a bit scary, and I want to speak to that a little bit more. And just further highlights, the need to have a more accurate, centralized asset inventory. I think in our investigations, when we did review that 54 million, I can say, with confidence that is not obviously accurate, and it is coming primarily through LCB roads and the forecasting that we scheduled in for them. I would expect that upon further revisions and as we go through the LCB roads record by record, we should be able to produce a more accurate forecast for 2026. But the idea remains the same and the message is the same, having a more accurate asset inventory that is not just geared towards, to satisfy the financial reporting or PSAB, but more kind of towards asset management in general, is the message here. And having that centralized asset inventory will lead to a more accurate forecast. So next slide, please. So that brings us to the longer term forecast that we did. And again, the 110 years might look really, too long term, some would say, but our counter is that these are the number of years that we need for every asset in your current portfolio to go through a full replacement cycle. So this is assuming that each asset is replaced at least once in this framework, this timeline here. And it is also just kind of further highlights the average annual capital requirements, right? So that's where the 7 million that we say we need annually, this is where it's coming from, where it's now assuming that it will get replaced, within this 110 years. So next slide, please. So with that, and with our ability to now generate your annual capital requirements, we were able to put together a financial strategy and at the very least highlight your capital deficit with the funding that is available. So you'll see there that assets, or the entire asset portfolio, is currently funded at 54% of their long-term capital requirements. And I will say again, this doesn't include assets that may be needed for growth or for anything else, just whatever is currently in the inventory. And your annual capital deficit is about 3.2 million. And the current funding that is available is about 3.81. Next slide, please. So how does this compare with others? We do have average annual reinvestment rates. Unfortunately, the 2019 report card didn't really have or doesn't have the target rates, but I was able to put together just some numbers from the 2016 report card. So just taking a look across each of the asset categories, you'll see that it's roughly within that range of the target rate nationally. Now, mind you, this is 2016, but hopefully the idea comes across. And you'll see that for most cases, the Kevin Monaghan is in line with the ranges that are provided there. Next slide, please. So as part of the financial strategy and to achieve full funding and to ultimately reduce that infrastructure deficit, we've recommended that there should be a total tax increase for tax funded assets by 19.99%. So that brings us to an annual tax increase of about 1.9%. And then for your water rate funded assets, it'll take 10 years to achieve full funding with a total total rate increase of about 1% and an annual rate increase by 0.2%. For your sanitary rate funded assets, we're looking at a 15-year until full funding and with a total rate increase of about 95.3% and an annual rate increase by 4.6%. Now, we do acknowledge that there was a rate study that was done in November 2020. So, and I will clarify that this financial strategy here is based on the most recent available information. So it is subject to change. It is not something that is required. And we can certainly, with better information as it gets available, we can certainly revise those numbers. Next slide, please. And so then finally, just the recommendations and next steps once after the completion of the A&P. So the first message and critical message is to continue to review and refine the asset inventory in consultation with internal departments or stakeholders, and to implement a portfolio-wide data governance strategy to increase accuracy and confidence in the data, to conduct an asset management needs assessment to identify resources and investment required, to provide staff and/or council training opportunities to ensure asset management principles are understood across the board. Point number 2 is to prepare for the next set of OREG requirements that are coming up in 2024 and 2025. For 2024, the township should develop levels of service statements and identify levels of service metrics for non-core assets. So they did provide the 2022 requirement did provide levels of service metrics for core assets, but for 2024, each municipality should determine their own levels of service statements as well as their own levels of service metrics. And then for 2025, to identify the proposed or target levels of service. And then for 2025 also to develop a medium to long-term external communication strategy to engage the public on asset management and obtain feedback to inform development of the target levels of service. And then finally, just continuous improvement and regular review. An asset management plan is what we call our living document. So meaning it should be updated regularly to inform long-term planning. And another kind of key recommendation there is just to continue to operationalize the asset management database that houses the township's asset inventory and through its functionality. So we have the risk framework that's now been established, as well as the lifecycle strategies, continuing to use those in your capital plan, in your forecasting, as well as refining them as better information or as better data gets available is the key recommendation there. Next slide, please. And so that's my presentation. Thank you all. I can take questions now.
Very good. Thank you. Any questions from members of council? Deputy Mayor Graham, I see your hand.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, first question should be an easy one, Ahmad. Thanks for the presentation. Are you going to be available later on when we get to the actual report concerning the data or the presentation information in a bit more granular detail? Because I have a number of questions.
So through you, Mayor, yes, I will be available, yes.
Okay, and then, well, maybe I'll let you off after the next one, so you'll get away fairly easy for a little while anyways. What are the implications of missing this July deadline, or what are the incentivizations for meeting the deadline, or for having this plan in place whatsoever, other than it being a checkbox requirement?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, and that's a great question. There's no kind of documented I'd say no documented issues that can arise from not having it by the July 1st. But from what we understand, it will reduce the opportunity for the township to apply for grants, as this will become a requirement for certain grant applications. So while there isn't, like a mandatory deadline date, but it will kind of hinder the township's opportunity to apply for grants, as that will become a requirement. I'm not saying that, you're going to apply for a grant right at July 2nd or something, but that's the only kind of critical, I'd say critical deadline or critical requirement or the need for the AMP.
And in your industry experience, are you aware of other municipalities that are not meeting said deadline?
Yes, we are. Yes, we're working with a few that won't be able to make the July 1st specifically, but they are aiming to have it done sooner rather than later. So I'd say a lot of them are hoping to complete it by the summer, or as soon as possible is a better answer, I guess.
So roughly, based on just your current workload, would you be able to forecast a percent of how many would and how many won't?
I'd say that's a really good question. Just from my own workload, I'd say about 60 to 70% will have it completed. And then there's,
Fair enough.
30 to 40 that are working on it. Now I will say, sorry, is that it's not, and when I say not completed, I'm not saying that they're not going to complete it. They will complete it. It just won't meet the July 1st deadline.
Of course. Yeah. The deadline was what I was asking. Yeah. Correct. Yep. Okay. I'll retain the majority of my questions for the more fulsome discussion in the staff report, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Any other questions from members of council? Councillor Huntley.
Oh, I almost got a promotion.
You almost got a deputy there, yeah.
Just a question around I think it's slide 32, where you come up with the $7 million a year that you're looking to fund the assets. Do you have any idea what percent of our overall budget that represents? And out of curiosity, for other municipalities, what percent do you believe, is a reasonable percent of their total revenues to be spent on asset replacement?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's a really good question, Councillor. I don't have the exact figure off the top of my head, but I can certainly get back to you. I'm not exactly sure about the percentage. I'm hesitant to give you an estimated value, so I can certainly get back to you. I'm just not sure of the exact percentage or breakdown.
Well, even if it's not exact percentage, I'm thinking it's pretty close to about 70% of our budget. Does 70% of a budget going to asset make sense? Like, how does a municipality function with that if we were really to live up to this? I can see,
so through you, Mr. Mayor, I can see the issue there, but the way I would kind of reverse it just to say that it would make sense, because these are the assets that are providing services to the residents. So it technically would be the majority of the budget going towards there. Now, again, I'm not sure about the exact percentage, but I would assume that the main objective of municipality would be to provide services to the residents, right? So it's not that far feasible to say that a certain majority of the percentage, or a certain close to 50% of the percentage, would go towards residents and providing that level of service.
I guess I'd be curious to see what on a larger scale, kind of what that breakdown is for municipalities, because I agree that the assets are provide a lot of the service to our residents, but I'm not sure how we sit at a budget meeting and knock out all the other services that aren't assets in order to accomplish that.
I see Director Pope has her hand up and is waiting very patiently, and I can assure you she probably wants to address your question, Councillor Huntley.
Oh, and she's going to make it like 70.2 or something.
Go ahead, Ms. Pope.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor to Council, just as a preliminary calculation, you're about 65%. So Councillor Huntley, you're fairly accurate, you're pretty close. And so when you're talking about though the annual capital requirement, it's just like Ahmad said, in order for us to run our services, these are the capital infrastructure components. And of course, they're not all paid out at the same time, but they are correct. Now, taking a look at ours, because they're both tax and or water user friendly or user rate established, it's not all tax based. So you just need to look at the piece that's tax based. And in the presentation, the recommendation was to raise our percentage of investment by 1.9% over a 10-year period. And in doing so, we could help fund that gap. We have historically been trying to put 100% of the asset replacement reserve, which is based on depreciation levels. We've all had this conversation before. That's based on historical cost, the original AMP that was established in 2013. But now we're progressing forward. It's now replacement cost. So we always knew that the amount of funding to go aside if we're trying to fully fund projects in the future, we would have to put in a component for replacement cost, not just historical. So based on this report card on the tax-based side, the 1.9% over the 10 years is about $194,000 additional on top of what we've already been investing through the asset replacement reserve. So in pretty good condition. And then as far as the water and wastewater components, they're utilized when we go through the water and wastewater rate study. And as Ahmad has alluded to many times, the asset management plan is exactly that. It's a living plan document. We continue to revise and use updated information as we invest and we make changes, we make improvements, reduce our costs because of even the example that he gave with the roads and the slurry seal. So the management of our assets can also reduce our costs long-term as well. So just preliminary though, 65%, you were very, very close.
Thank you, Ms. Pope.
Very good. Further questions? I think I'll save my questions for the report as well. If there's any other members of council, any questions now, or you also have the opportunity to ask them during the report. And Ahmad, you will be still here for the report as well in case Kimberly needs to call upon you.
Yes.
Okay, very good. All right, motion then to receive that presentation. Deputy Mayor Graham, Councillor Huntley, Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Shaw,
Yes.
and Councillor Bell.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Our next item is item 8.1, delegation, George Rabb, unopened Ann Street road allowance. Ms. Page, you will kindly let Mr. Rabb in.
Mayor McFadden, Mr. Rabb has joined us.
Very good. Welcome, Mr. Rabb. You are muted and your camera is off, but I'm sure that you're working on that. There we go. Welcome, George. Oh, you're still muted.
Send him a question to try to unmute, see what's happening, Mayor McFadden.
Do it here.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, good.
There we go. Excellent. Very good, George. The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, well, thank you to Council and Mr. Mayor for hearing me out again. I'm still interested in being able to build on this vacant lot I have, which is big enough to be buildable if I had road frontage, and the only access that I can have is through the road allowance. So I'm willing to do as I was, 3.5 years ago when I initially asked, whatever, I can to be able to obtain it. So I've, in the little notes that I had with my delegation presentation, I outlined some of the sort of background work that I've tried to do, speaking to various lawyers who had worked with the township and others, and planners and stuff, to try and get some more insight into it. And I just wanted to hear from council what the big problem is. What was in when staff reported that there was no benefit to sell it to me, and also that it would provide access, by selling it, it would remove the access to my larger property. I wasn't able to find too much to substantiate that as being a possibility or a reason for not selling it. So, here we are. I'm hoping that this time around that we will be able to proceed.
All right, very good. George, in light of the fact that you've been before us before and we've had this conversation, I will be respectful of everybody's time. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to suggest a motion. And then if I get a seconder, then we can have a discussion meaningful towards what the motion is. We can come to its conclusion, and that would be efficiently using all of our time. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Okay. That council declare the lands of the unopened Ann Street Road allowance, Millbrook, surplus to the needs of the Township of Monaghan, and that council directs staff to carry out an independent appraisal of the unopened Ann Street Road allowance, Millbrook, and that council directs staff to negotiate directly with George Rabb on the sale of unopened Ann Street Road allowance, Millbrook, as per the disposition of land bylaw number 2016-07, and that all legal costs and the costs of the appraisal to be borne by the applicant George Rabb should Mr. Rabb agree to the purchase of the unopened Ann Street Road. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Huntley, discussion?
Did you want, oh, sorry, Mark.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Deputy Mayor Graham.
Did you want to bring forward the staff report later on? Because this motion.
Yeah, it's still coming forward. If this passes, then I would look to just simply receive that. So if you've got questions, I would raise them now as opposed to waiting, because if this passes, it sort of mutes the report. So I would raise them now, Deputy Mayor.
I've read the staff report, and I think the merits in it hold. So there you
Okay.
go.
Any other questions from members of council? Okay, Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
No.
Councillor Shaw,
Yes.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Motion is approved. Okay, thank you, George. Does that answer the question?
It does indeed. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Excellent. Next item is the minutes of the regular council meeting held June 6, 2022. Motion to adopt those minutes. Councillor Huntley, Councillor Shaw, Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
and Councillor Shaw.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Next item, Millbrook Valley Trails Advisory Committee meeting minutes of April 25th, 2022. Motion for those minutes. Councillor Shaw and Deputy Mayor Graham. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Shaw,
Yes.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden.
Yes, motion is approved. Next item, Millbrook Downtown BIA Board of Management meeting minutes of April 7th, 2022. Motion for those minutes. Councillor Shaw and Councillor Huntley. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Shaw,
Yes.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
and Deputy Mayor Graham.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Next report, 11.1 report finance 2022-09, 2022. Development charges background study report and bylaw number 2022-43. Ms. Pope is the report that was before us before. However, you've come back with additional information for council.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mayor McFadden. I have before council today the new report, which provides a little bit of additional information that was requested. So if we could just scroll down to, I believe it's page 2. Continue on there. Thank you. So just stopping right there. So basically council had asked for, okay, you asked for 3 years. It's in my report here, but I see that it's truncated and cut. I also see the next ones there are cut. So that doesn't help you. Okay. So there were 3 years provided. I am going to find out why that loaded that way. Cindy, could you just take a look at your original document provided and just see if it's just a matter of when it got merged? Because I'm
Mayor
pretty sure.
McFadden, Ms. Pope, I'm looking as we speak.
Thank you.
No,
Sorry for that. I can speak to this while she looks for that as well.
it got cut when it was merged, but continue.
Okay. So basically, we're bringing back for the same information. We just wanted to make sure that council could see the breakdown on the actual report with regards to the revenues that you requested, and then also the foregone loss of revenues potentially that the building department had also pulled for this report. And then also there's a memo attached for clarification from Watson Associates, and both Daryl and Gary are available and on standby here today for the council meeting to ask or to answer any further questions of council if there are any, since the opportunity to review the original report provided early in May.
Good. Ms. Page, go ahead.
Mayor McFadden, if council would like to see those, this was how the original document was sent. So maybe it was prior to being PDF that it created that. So if Ms. Pope wants to send those, if council feels it would be beneficial to display those, we can just take a quick moment and gather that and display the new screen.
To the councilors, are you going to ask questions specific to those? If so, then we can maybe even just have Kimberly display it. If nobody's going to ask the question, I don't want to waste Kimberly's time to find it. If you're going to ask a question, then I'll have her find it. No. Okay. All right. You want to move along then to the recommendation of the report?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So back up. Thank you, Cindy. Back up to the recommendations. So I have before you the development charges updates study dated March the 2nd, including the addendum number 1 dated March the 18th, as presented on April 4th at the public council meeting by Watson and Associates. That council would approve bylaw number 2022-43 effective June 21st. That council would review the previous motion from October 21st, 2019, which reduced the industrial class under the non-residential charges with the percentage change from 100% to 0%, and that council would advise if they wish to approve a new motion to reduce the industrial uses for the non-res charges in the township-wide services from 100 to 0% under the new development charges bylaw. The reason for the recommendations 3 and 4 is if nothing is done, the previous motion was specific to that bylaw, and we want to make sure that we pull forward exactly what council's intent is in regard to the industrial class.
Very good. Questions from members of council? Ultimately, we have it before us. The big question, if I can summarize, Ms. Pope, is essentially what we're doing specifically with the industrial class, if we're carrying forward what we currently had, or if we're coming forward with the calculated numbers as is, which was 100%. Correct?
Yes, and just for further clarification, the rate still remains within the bylaw. It's just a matter of whether or not we're going to charge the 100% of the rate or 0%, but the rate would still be passed as part of the bylaw, just in the case you were to choose today to set it at the 0% and then at a future date wanted to change it. So the rate is established in this bylaw. It's just a matter of what percentage of that rate you intend to charge.
Very good. Okay. Any questions for Ms. Pope? Okay, discussion on our one discussion item. Deputy Mayor Graham, go ahead.
Sorry, there was one question I had with regards to the last page of the document. I don't think it'll impact any of the motions. It's more just a structural or component. I believe I'm just scrolling to that page now, so bear with me 1 second. I believe it was page 3. Hold on a sec. I'm getting to my point now. It was with regards to the Millbrook settlement area. Correct. That's it. Thanks, Cindy. Thanks for your help. 307. There you go. With the update that we have since approved and is going to be recognized in the county map, is there any language or any update that is there any implications of that map being sort of out of date or, for moving forward with the DC accumulation as for the township for the village of Millbrook?
I'll ask that the planning department come on and speak to this particular component. However, these are rates township-wide for our municipality.
Right.
We do have water and sewer rates that are charged specific to those that are on the system. We don't have ward rates, so the rates are not set where one ward pays a different rate than another. So we have full township-wide rates, so I don't believe it's going to change anything to do with the rate, but I'll allow the planning department to come on and speak to the map if they suggest that there will be any changes.
To you, Mayor McFadden, to members of council and Deputy Mayor Graham. The map in the development charges bylaw is as presented. So the revisions to the county official plan aren't approved yet. So this map reflects what is currently in full force and effect.
Correct. So when this map does become theoretically obsolete, should that occur in the very immediate future, there's no implications due to the fact that the DCs is a township-wide policy, correct? I'm just looking for clarity. I don't believe there to be. I just want to know, because if you know, there's no sense in doing a formalized update without the map that is on the precipice of being approved, and I believe has already been endorsed by council with some revisions.
Through you, Mayor McFadden, to members of council, maybe Daryl or Gary could step in on this, because I believe, so the map that's been endorsed for the county official plan, though, has not yet been approved by A, county council, or B, the province of Ontario. So I believe that with the Schedule C as presented in the development charges bylaw, you may have to do an amendment to the bylaw to change the area in the mapping. But I'm going to be upfront. Development charges are not my total area of expertise, so I would defer to Daryl or Gary.
I don't see Daryl or Gary yet. Ms. Page is letting them in.
Okay. I didn't foresee it being this disruptive, so apologies in advance, council.
It's a great question, Deputy Mayor Graham, because in this case, we're not in a rush in order to implement the bylaw. And if we're talking a matter of a week before the county approves something, is it worth waiting another cycle, or is it's irrelevant? I'm not sure either. It's a great question.
Or simply including language
Sure.
that allows for the map to be updated should another one come to fruition and
Yep.
be more accurate for the duration of the existing of this bylaw.
Absolutely. Mr. Scanlon and Mr. Abbs, welcome.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
It looks like you're both sitting in the same room, but you're not.
He's sitting on my lap. Yeah. We can only afford one interior decorator, so all the rooms look like this.
We're doing our part, Gary, so.
That's good. So very simply through you, Mr. Mayor, obviously almost all the services are municipal wide. With this particular map, right now, this is the urban boundary for water and wastewater charges. In the future, if there's refinements that will arise, through the official plan process, then we can modify this map.
But would it require an amendment to the bylaw?
We could.
And that's what I was just trying to, sorry, Gary, I cut you off, but that's why I was just trying to avoid by having some inclusive language that might bypass the need to do for the formality of that process, as it doesn't, as in my understanding of development charges with how we're approaching them, it doesn't, the area itself doesn't have any implications on the collection of it. It would just allow the document to be as up to date moving forward as possible without, I don't even know if we would bother to warrant.
So just if I could, through you, Mr. Mayor, the boundary that we used was how we did the calculations. So there was some works that were identified that actually are outside the servicing of this area, and we call that post-period benefit. So if we were to expand the map area, we'd have to actually kind of revisit calculations. So I think for the time being, I think it's adequate. I think it will take a little bit of time should the map expand to see developments proceeding, but it should be relatively straightforward and quick if we needed to do it, if developments are being approved.
Okay.
Very good. Councillor Huntley, I saw your hand. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. My question would be, why do we even need a map for the water and the wastewater area? Like, why not just have it simply stated if you're connected to it, then you're on it? Right, then the map can be whatever the map is, but the dictator is actually the water system itself.
Go ahead, Mr. Scanlon.
Well, perhaps we could, that could be done. As I say, the calculations were done slightly different. I don't know whether if we just open it up, whether there'd be any adjustment or loss to it, we could modify this, remove the map and say, you know, within the Millbrook servicing area where you receive municipal water and wastewater, you will pay these charges. I have done that before. So if council would like to make that refinement, it's probably could be done relatively easily. I would just have to pull the bylaw and I could come back in and give you the appropriate adjustments to the bylaw if you wanted to pass it today.
Okay.
Through you, just a follow up. I think that's the more logical explanation. I mean, if we have to wait for various levels of people to approve a map when really where the pipes go is truly what dictates this, right?
As I say, there might be some refinements to the calculations, but they shouldn't significantly waver one way or another, but they would potentially affect the calculations. But as I say, if it's council's pleasure to do it in that way, we could do it, and then we'll just see if there's anything that turns on it as these developments proceed in between now and when we have to update the bylaw.
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, Mr. Scanlon, we could receive the report. We're going to deal with the industrial component, accept the recommendations, and then but have the bylaw come back at a future date with the modification as just discussed, or is that yes? Okay, Madam Clerk, you're okay if that's where we end up?
Mayor McFadden, I will leave that to the experts, but there's no reason we can't make recommendation 4 to say development and be brought back, or recommendation 5 be brought back at a later meeting, but we'll keep the same bylaw number, the 2022-43. It does include Schedule C on page. So yeah, I think we do need to do a little bit of modifications under 6.1. It does specifically refer to that map, so we would need to repeal or amend that bylaw. So I think it's better to clean it up if that's council's wishes.
Is it easier from a clerk's perspective to bring the whole thing back just so you can do that part? Or is there parts of this report that are going to change? I'm just thinking for simplicity for yours.
Well, I'm going to be honest with you, Mayor McFadden. We can work within the guidelines of the clerk procedures to amend this. I don't want to change the timelines or have any effect on any of that by waiting for this to come back at the next meeting. So respectfully, I will leave that to the consultants and Ms. Pope to answer better.
Okay. We're good. Nothing will change until we have a bylaw in place. So I'm thinking if it just makes it cleaner to bring back that with that modifications and pass it all at the same time, I'm okay with that. Unless, Gary, there's any other reason to do it differently. I'm not trying to waste your time. I want to ensure it's used well and efficiently too. Which do you see making more sense? When somebody goes back and looks at this and they see a bylaw and it doesn't match with the last report, that's my only concern. Right. And I guess I'm not quite sure your procedural bylaw, and that's where I do rely on Ms. Page's judgment. But I know exactly how I would modify it. I would remove the schedule. I would remove the reference to the schedule, and then it would be that the charges be imposed within within the Millbrook area where municipal water and or wastewater services are provided to the development. And I think that would be all you'd need to do in order to fulfill what the councillor wishes to achieve. Okay, and maybe council, in the meantime, if we can address the item relative to the industrial component, and when we bring it back, we can have the completed bylaw and everything before us. That would be the final one that would be nice and clean, and everybody would know what was adopted, and the supporting bylaw could be on the same meeting. Reasonable? Ms. Pope?
Thank you, Mayor. I've sent to the clerk just that update, because if we're going to have the discussion about the industrial charges, I wanted you to have the information that you did request, which was part of the report, if you don't mind. So Cindy, if that could be just pulled up, just to provide council just an indication of what potentially they're waiving. Thank you.
Through Mayor McFadden's misspoke, we will bring that up. The only other conversation that has gone on that Mr. Scanlon's referenced to is that there may be a little bit of a change into a chart. So I'm not sure exactly what that chart is or what that calculation is. And if council feels comfortable enough, I have no idea how much of a change that is. That's the only thing I would caution or bring to light, because you're right. This will be pulled when you and I are no longer here. So.
Very good. And with reference to that, we're not expecting anything drastic, but maybe that could be highlighted in a brief report that's brought at the beginning, just to highlight what that change was. So in effect, whatever decision was on industrial, addition to what the changes were relative to dropping that map and replacing it with those that are on water wastewater calculation, if there is going to be a change, which I shouldn't expect to be long. Everything else has been well covered in this report. Okay, so we have before us, very good.
If I may, Mayor. So I just wanted to show you that from the years that you requested since this bylaw was adopted and the changes made from 2019 to 2021, just over $4 million in development charges received. During that same period of time, the building department has provided those in which was the loss of revenue from the industrial class, which was $111,771.80. So we're just trying to make sure that you can see what occurred. We can never anticipate what's coming in the future, but this is what the last 3-year history shows us.
Very good. Now that's before us. Anybody have any questions relative to that? Okay, none. Then the final part of that, if we can draw a conclusion on that, what is what's the choice of council and how best we're going to deal with the industrial component of the development charges? Nobody's jumping to it. I'm comfortable with continuing to waive the industrial component, leaving it 0. Okay, moved, second. Any discussion on that? Mr. Scanlon and Mr. Abs, that's clear. There was no more. That's literally what you needed on that component. It was where we're at. So we're sitting at right now with a motion for 0.
It's, if I could, Mr.
Yes.
Mayor,
Yeah.
is it 0? I think historically you may have been posted on the water wastewater to service the.
It's
the
100.
cost. It's 100, and then the municipal wide would be 0. I'm just trying to be clear. Okay.
Yeah, and that's what we currently have. And I don't think we ever gave anybody breaks on the water wastewater component of it.
It's correct.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And Mr. Phillips has your hand up.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. Just for clarification, just last time I asked that, just to make sure we're charging right and it's council's intent. Is it for non-res or just the industrial section that you want to remain at 0? So commercial,
just the industrial.
Just industrial.
Just
okay,
industrial.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks.
But 100% on the wastewater for industrial.
But 100% on the water wastewater for everybody. There's no exemptions on water wastewater for anyone.
Just say it out
Understood. Correct. Thanks.
on the record.
Yes. Madam
Yes,
Clerk, okay, go ahead, Ms. Pope.
Thank you. Mayor McFadden, through you, just for clarification, to reemphasize what is under 3, reviewing the reduced industrial class under non-residential, and then again in part 4 there on the recommendation. But if we scroll down, we can actually take a look of the attached bylaw, and it'll show it in the charts down below. I did include them in the report as well, so I'm really hoping they didn't truncate here as well. So if we could continue as soon as you hit to the chart. So right there, Cindy, thank you very much. If you could scroll in there just a little bit. This is what's currently included in the existing bylaw, showing the 0% across on the township-wide services, and then the Millbrook area specific water wastewater at 100%. And so therefore, if we go down below a little bit further, you'll see what we've included this time around. That's the rates. Continue on, please. And there again, so this is part of the new bylaw, showing again the 0 on the municipal wide, and then the Millbrook area specific being 100% in the new bylaw as well.
Yes. Very good. And that has the specific indication that it's just for the industrial uses of the non-residential.
That is correct.
Perfect. Certainly, go ahead.
Through you, Chair, to Ms. Pope, I doubt you'll have this information at your fingertips, but it might be worth a try. I'm just curious, how long does it take before we come back positive of not collecting those development charges in terms of the tax base of having those businesses in the township? Does that make any sense? Like,
so if you're referring to the positive, are you referencing recovery?
I guess we never get positive on the development charges, do we? I'm just curious.
Because we never really recoup the development charges, right? But if you're saying there's an advantage to having them now located in our municipality and we are receiving a tax rate and therefore receiving taxes, but again, remembering that our taxes cover our services and our capital replacement program. So we never really get back the development charge portion of it, if that's what you're referencing. But does it generate the income through the property taxes? Yes, for sure. But that's being allocated to manage and operate the assets and the operations.
Right. Yeah. I guess I was trying to correlate it. And I guess there is no real correlation there.
Yeah, it's hard because we've lost that now. Like there's no way to, once it's gone, it's gone. We can't recoup it. We're offsetting it through like our own reserves basically, because there's no funding for it, but we still have to fund the DCs. So I don't know if there's a better explanation, perhaps, Gary, since you're on the call, that using the legislation perhaps to explain that further.
No, I think you've done a good job. Normally you're operating, property taxes are funding day-to-day operating costs for the most part. The development charges, if you don't collect it, then you have to fund it, which would come from, property taxes or reserves. So it's just a choice that council makes in ensuring, I guess, that particular type of development. You remove any perceived impediments that might, remove your competitiveness with others. But as you, as in many others, do make some reductions or exemptions for industrial. So you are in a very similar pattern to a lot of other municipalities, especially in your area.
All right. And through you, Chair, just to follow up, I guess, Gary, what I was trying to do is try to figure, okay, how do we determine whether it's beneficial or not? And I guess that's the hard one to come up with. Like, obviously, we, having the industrial here, helps the tax base, but I guess, is it worth sacrificing development charges? And I believe it is, in the sense that we get the businesses here, but it's just a matter of quantifying it versus qualifying it, right? I'm not sure we can. I guess that's where it comes down to.
With minimal effort, it's difficult to answer that question. With a lot more effort, it is. But I think, as I say, if you want to be consistent with many of your neighbors and such, you've done it 50-50. You've made sure that the water and the wastewater is paid for. That is, I believe, critical. It's a critical services which should be funded. The other services are a little bit more fluid in that if you didn't have the money, you could delay a road construction perhaps by a year, and you wouldn't feel the same impacts as delaying water and wastewater. So I can understand why eliminating more of the softer services is more compelling. But I think over time, quite often there is a financial impact, but it's a trade-off.
Well, maybe you can provide some clarity or understanding, or further understanding, on the difference between the classes of the rate between industrial, for example, versus residential, and the significantly higher rate that industrial would pay. So although if the DC is waived, the recovery on, is it 1.9 or is it 2.1? It's significantly higher than the 1.0 for residential.
You mean the tax assessment?
Yes.
So a couple of different things. I mean, when Impact looks at, if you looked at an acre of residential land and the assessment that arises from that, it would be considerably more than what you would get from industrial. So it's two parts. It's the valuation, an assessment valuation for res, and then the non-residential on a per acre basis is probably considerably less your assessment, but then they're being charged, let's say 2.1. So you're taking something that may start at 50 cents on the dollar, and then you're timesing it by 2. So you have to take those adjustments into consideration as well. So that's why I say it takes a little bit more effort to go through and make those calculations.
Very good. Any other questions on this? We do have a motion on the floor. We are going to bring all of this back. Oh, Ms. Page, maybe we don't. Go ahead.
We do have a motion on the floor, but I'm wondering if we should amend recommendation 2 to say that council approved bylaw number 2022-43 as amended to remove Schedule C and its references. And then we can just continue to move forward. We can get the updated bylaw from Watson and Associates.
I don't think number 2, we want to approve it all because we're just going to bring it back and the plan is to approve it at the next meeting when we have all that information before us. We made a decision on 3 and 4.
Perfect.
Right?
Okay.
So
I just didn't know if we wanted, so you just want to remove 2 in its entirety.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll scratch it off. We're focused in now on the industrial component, so that can be wrapped up. We can get that into the calculation. We're going to have the change of the map, and then when everything comes back to the next meeting, we should be ready to go to pass it.
Perfect.
Is that the understanding of council? We're all good? And Gary and Daryl, good? Okay, Kimberly?
Thank you. Just to clarify, I know that Gary doesn't have this sheet of our tax ratios right in front of him. So industrial, when he was talking about CVA and the assessment value from MPAC, our tax ratio is 1.5432. So basically 1.5 times what the residential taxpayer would pay, just to answer the question from the mayor. So therefore, back to the recommendations. So we will bring forward that report. As for what you said there for number 2, and then just as far as a timeline, do we know when the map will change, and therefore we could have an understanding of the timeline when we're coming back to council?
And Mr. Abt, our next meeting is the first, is it, I don't have the calendar in front of me. Is it the first Monday of July or is it at the holiday? I can't remember.
July 4th, I believe.
Oh, okay, so July 4th. If we can't make that meeting, then our next meeting is the beginning of August.
Okay, thank you.
I'm fine to leave it open and I'll leave it to you. Either we're not under a time crunch to get this through. If you can make July work, great. Otherwise, it'll be beginning of August.
If it's a matter of just adjusting and pulling out the other map and putting the new one in, I'll just, I'm not sure about calculations, and Gary, see if you'd like to speak.
Go ahead, Mr. Scanlon.
For you, Mr. Mayor, we'll pull out the map in its entirety, and we'll deal with the change through wording that we'll include within the bylaw. So we don't need another map. We'll change it to just address if you're receiving the water and or the wastewater services within the Millbrook area, then you will be required to pay the appropriate development charges for water or wastewater services. So I'll work the wording.
Well done. Ms. Hurley, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Scanlon, already answered the question exactly. I just wanted to clarify we are not going ahead with a map.
Right.
All right, thank you.
Okay, all right. If the clerk's okay, I'm gonna call for a recorded vote.
I'm good. Yeah, absolutely. Mayor McFadden and Deputy Mayor Graham are your mover and seconder.
Okay, recorded vote.
Scott, I believe Bill had a question.
I think,
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, I think Bill was voting.
Oh.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Shaw,
Yes.
and Councillor Belch.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Gary and Daryl, thank you very much. We'll see you again soon.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. Our next item, Report Finance 2022-10 Asset Management Planning Update. Ms. Pope.
Thank you, Council. So thank you for your patience as you received our asset management plan update that Ahmad presented today. The positive outcome of this plan is that not only have we met phase 2, but we have been inputting since the purchase of Public Sector Digest software citywide, all of our assets. So we are actually in a positive position moving forward, meaning that our assets are actually in the system. However, we will be working further along to meet that 2024 deadline to ensure that we identify current levels of service and the cost of maintaining those services amongst all departments. Just to put into perspective, that $215 million asset portfolio, approximately 77% is made up of the public works, including water, wastewater. That is why it's part of the core infrastructure that the government has required through the legislation, knowing that it's the largest component for all the municipalities. Outside of that, we have 23% that makes up the fleets, buildings, and land improvements. And like I said, we have the historical cost in there. They are identified, and we will work towards the 2024 phase 3 plan and all the different plans with the OREG. So therefore, I have before you, Council, this report for you to receive, the asset management plan, and for you also to approve placing this plan on our Township of Cavan-Monaghan website. We do have the 2013. It's been there since it's been approved by Council. This is a living document that does change, but this is the most recent revision. We are presenting it in 2022, but as the report states and the plan states, these are the assets recorded in our system as of December 31st, 2021.
Very good. Questions? Deputy Mayor Graham, I know you had some.
Yeah, thank you. I have a lot of questions. I'm worried about the presentation of the information and I believe the inaccuracy of the picture that it presents. And I'm just trying to reconcile that belief with A, the timeline that we're trying to meet without any implications to miss, and then B, the comments of the living nature of the document. To me, I would have much more confidence in having the more accurate document to then be posted and circulated, et cetera, than, you know, moving forward with something just because it can be changed at a later date, because we've invested a lot of time and effort by both staff and Ahmad to get this far. But so I guess there's two real areas of concern that stick out to me, and one being the looming disaster of $54 million required in our road network and infrastructure. I don't really understand that the presentation of the information and the condition seems to have deteriorated exponentially since I believe it was 2020 when we did the road need study. The majority of those LCB road condition roads seem to have, you know, degraded at an exponential rate from where they were over the last 5 years. And when you see presentations of the information like on page 350 of the report that present, you know, the average life cycle or the average life of some of these conditions of these LCB roads is less than 6 years. We're not even a year into the minimum life cycle. And I know these are average numbers, but, you know, we're not 35% at a poor average condition. We're 55% at a poor condition. And then 35% at a very poor condition. So I just don't feel as though that's a true presentation. And I know in conversations with the Director of Public Works, it seems as though there are certain treatments that maybe aren't being recognized to the certain degree in the citywide system and are sort of corrupting the input into that data. Because, I mean, last time I checked, there's a lot of what I would consider LCB roads that are that we own as a township that are in fabulous condition. And I can't imagine that in the next 2 years, they'll be requiring, you know, $50 million overall, you know, throughout the entire municipality for reconstruction. And that, like, and I know it's a living document, but that really paints a much more dire picture of the amount of revenues that we need to be accumulating for asset. So maybe I'll stop on that subject and then move on to the next one after if there's any comments from staff or Ahmad.
I was going to suggest, Deputy Mayor, I completely agree with you. I'm not sure what exactly the requirement is to submit. We can submit what we have, but something else has to come back because, quite frankly, it's wrong. Like we can just look at the numbers and we can see that the 61 plus the 18, 79% of our road infrastructure does not need to be, its useful life is not expiring in 5 years. It isn't. So we can acknowledge that, and we can send off what we need to, but we really need that corrected because, quite frankly, in the entire county, we probably have the best roads of any municipality in all of Peterborough County, given our historical past of the hard topping and all of that extra stuff. So And it doesn't speak to the volumes of the slurry seal, et cetera. So it's fine. Everybody can make mistakes. At the end of the day, that number is definitely not correct, and we can bring back something that we can work with, but something definitely has to be brought back that's more reflective of the actual state, because there's no way 79% of our roads have less than 5 years left on them.
Well,
I think
yeah, and just to build back on that before we turn it over to Ahmad, I mean, like when you went through the presentations, one of the things you highlighted is the inputs in to inform that rating, right? And you know, when we go back to that road need study, like the condition and the recognition of the conditions of our infrastructure then were way better than this, and they seem to have fallen 2 phases in the span of 2 years. So if that was one of the main inputs in that classification, all of something with regards to the other data that's collected, which I don't believe is much in the way of actual, you know, physical on-site inspections, seems to have resulted in that inventory of the infrastructure to be tremendously a lower quality or in a worse state off than it was 2 years ago, which I can't get my mind around. And I certainly can't be informed well enough to make funding decisions as to how to contribute to that amount of money in the future. So open to questions, and then we'll move on to the next one.
Very good. Ms. Pope, go ahead.
It would be my preference, Council, that we would not approve a document that contains revisions, because every time we submit an application or we're required to refer back, if there's time needed so that the roads department can go through the LCV schedules and take a look at that, go back to the roads need study and see where they're seeing the overarching additional amounts that are being included, to provide them the opportunity to do that, because it makes it very difficult if I'm stating one thing in an application that we're looking for funding. I need the asset management plan to support what we currently have. These are the assets as of the 31st. We know the historical cost is absolutely correct and balances to the financial statements, but if the management of it and the annual replacement is not correct, that drives this asset management plan, we need to provide opportunity for the Public Works Department to work with Public Sector Digest and correct those before we pass it. So my preference would be not to pass it today, and to allow opportunity for them to meet and go through how this deviates from the previous road study and what additional costings they've included that are not supposed to be there.
Good. Well, with 79% of our roads falling apart and needing replacement, it would set us up pretty good for lots of grants, but that might not be the approach. Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
I'd like to hear from Ahmad, and then maybe
Wayne,
if he could maybe respond. I'm just like, I'd like to hear from the individuals as to what might be the catalyst for this either miscalculation or what we're going to do about it.
Go ahead.
Thank through you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks for the question. So I agree with the general sentiment that, of course, we don't want to release anything that is inaccurate. I have had a chance the last couple of days to review exactly where the spike is coming from and the reasoning behind it. So as best as I can summarize, the nature of the citywide inventory as it is currently and as it has been is more it has been geared towards more of a finance-based inventory. So just a high-level example I can give you, and Wayne and I were actually looking at this morning too. There is a road in question. It's an LCB road. The install date for that road is 1970 something, 1978, and the useful life of that road in citywide, and according to the statements and the inventory, is indicated to be 7 years. So citywide calculates it based on the 2020 assessment, and then it defaults to the useful life and the install date. So it's just general logic there, where if you do have an in-service date of 1970 something and you have a useful life of 7 years, citywide will then calculate and factor in the 2020 condition assessment and then project outwards. So that particular example that I'm talking about here, we looked at that in detail, and it was actually saying, yeah, while the current condition assessment was good at, was fair in 2020, in 2025 or 2026, it's due for replacement because it is only 7 years of useful life, right? So the key issue that I've seen, and again, this is not something that's just exclusive to Kevin Monaghan, it's for other municipalities that we've been working with too, is that the PSAB inventory was, again, not particularly set up for this purpose. And so for that reason, the useful lives that are in place, we've gone through several revisions, not with the township, but with other municipalities of revising their useful lives, the TCA policies, to better reflect the useful life of a road. And then also the nature of how the assets were previously loaded in. It doesn't make sense to, have a LCB road asset in question that is, dated to be from 1970s or 1980s, because it's gone through multiple replacements. It should have a more recent in-service date. Another issue that we've picked up on particular to this inventory is that our system allows you to identify and update a particular asset with betterments and improvements. What's been happening here is that those betterments have been loaded in as individual assets themselves. So we have multiple instances of the same road, just going through different surface treatments or different activities. So again, the key recommendation I give, and I gave in the presentation, is that inventory be revised so that it is better suited for asset management and not just for financial reporting, and complying with the PSAB regulations. And just a prior note, like I think we mentioned before, I'm happy to work with staff and continue to work with staff to refine it, and we can certainly revise that forecast to better kind of reflect it. I would think if we go record by record and road by road with public works staff, we should be able to identify and kind of get a more accurate forecasting for 2026.
Very good. Thank you very much, Ahmad. So Ms. Pope, just to understand with the July 1st deadline, are we okay to defer on this until we have the right information, or is that going to create an issue?
We just haven't been in the practice of submitting late. So I would need to contact them to find out. I know Ahmad spoke to there not being a penalty or what have you. I know in the first round of asset management plan, there's flexibility and quite a few months there to allow people to get on board. They understand. So I would assume it would be the same, but because we just haven't been in the practice, I haven't checked. So therefore I can reach out and find out. And perhaps, I mean, because it's a living document, if council felt comfortable to approve the asset management plan today so that we met the deadline, but then came back and then we approved the updated one, and that's the one that's posted to our website, there's nothing saying that we can only post one. It's a living document that grows. So we don't have multiple asset management plans because they change. The one that would be uploaded to the website and the most recent one approved by council is the one that would be used for grant approvals. And I don't have a grant that I'm necessarily trying to apply for in this next month. So if council would consider approving it today with the acknowledgement that it will come back updated in the public sector roads sections, we could do that also. I'll leave that decision up to council. I just don't know the answer because we just haven't been in the position to do this in the past and be late.
Very good. Deputy Mayor Graham, go ahead.
So two final comments then. I'm just I just want to ensure that I have like the understanding of the definitions, because in that documentation when you present it, it talks about, it works out to, when you do the 45 million by the 184, it's about $250,000 per kilometer. So by definition, what does the full restoration, or I guess to use the same sort of example, the cost of replacement, like what are we meaning for that amount of money?
I think that's a great question for the Director of Public Works, as he's worked in fine detail on all the schedules with Ahmad, so perhaps he can speak to that matter.
Go ahead, Mr. Hancock.
To Mr. Mayor, to the Deputy Mayor. First of all, Ahmad and I have had probably a couple of conversations this morning, and we looked at this projected date of 2026, and I just wanted to go back to that date and the comment. And one of the issues that happens is our road needs study was done in 2020. There's an update to be done in 2025, and that meant that the roads that were in what they call the 1 to 5 year category jumped into a now need, and that added to the factor of the dollar amount. The part of the puzzle that's not here, and I don't think we've adequately addressed, is certain programs like our slurry steel program where we're extending the life of these roadways for 3 to 5 years. So what Ahmad and I have talked about is re-looking at the program, at the assets individually, and probably do a site assessment of those from the point of view, are you seeing something in those roadways that within the next 5 years that is showing that we're going to have to replace them? And typically we've dealt with numbers, we've talked about kilometers of surface treated road. We were talking about unit prices this year because of COVID, because of the price of gas. Our unit prices in surface treatment went up about 20%. So that was just a number that Ahmad and I were trying to work with on what they call true cost per kilometer. We were last year replacing roads for about $28,000 per kilometer of double surface treatment. That's now up to about 35, depending on the amount of work and width of the roadway, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not a case when we do a program, we're working generally in surface treatment, we're somewhere between 250 to 300,000, and we're working with 8 to 10 kilometers of road that we do each year. This year we reduced the road kilometers slightly to match the budget, but I think I think the comment is fair from the deputy mayor that the road infrastructure in this township is much better than the projection that we're seeing in 2026. And that's where everything else seemed to be reasonable. And it was my sort of misunderstanding or not paying attention to that number is probably why we're looking at that number should be probably coming down substantially. Of the 54 million, there's about, I think, 44 million that is surface treatment. And that is where your main difference is. And while we certainly have roads in need of repair, and we have potholes, and we have roads that are falling apart, I believe our road conditions are generally fair to good, and therefore 5 years down the road, we should be still with the program we're working with, we should be in still fair to good. So Ahmad and I have talked about just going at the assets, the road asset, particularly the surface treatment, and doing a full review of those, not so much in the condition that was pointed out in 2020, but what do we expect the condition to be in 2026? That's where the difference is showing up, and what's showing up in the numbers, it shows up as a road to be totally reconstructed. And the other part of the puzzle that we've tried to pick up on is we've been doing sections of roadways. We don't do a complete. We're not doing from County Road 10 to 28. We're doing a kilometer in the middle. And I'm not sure that that's depicted because we'll have 50% of that section completed, but it goes over 3 to 4 years. So these are little pieces that we tried to pick up, but I don't think we've done it properly. I think the number is too high. And I think Ahmad and I agree that we should go back and relook at that. And it doesn't, when you look at it in the table, it shows the sort of the immensity of that movement. I think it's too much in 1 year. It doesn't make sense. So while we might say we're still under budget, everyone looks for more money for roads, I think the surface treatment program is generally doing well, and it's as well funded as others. And the roads in this township are as good or better than most in other areas. So you have to look at it and say we got to relook that 2026 number.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Hancock. At $54.5 million, I would entertain a motion to remove the causeway from the Hooten Line swamp. It does not need to be 4-laned, and that could eliminate that problem right there. Ms. Pope, are you more comfortable then because this is our last meeting before July. I was comfortable with submitting this in order to meet the timelines, recognize we're going to bring it back and have that discussion. I don't see this as penalizing us in any ways towards applying for funding, because quite frankly, it says we need a lot. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. Recognizing when we submit it, we could simply state that it is up for review, that there was some deficiencies that we're going to be working towards, and we're going to seek a resubmission. Unless you know any different, I'd prefer to do that than miss it and then not have an opportunity to revisit until July.
I would agree with you, Mayor. I think that further explanation from Ahmad and Wayne on the reconciliation portion, it's more dealing with the forecasting that's in this report. I would agree. I would rather meet deadlines. We have worked so hard over the last number of years to make sure that we did meet this deadline. And then also, though, absolutely, when that change is done, we'll bring it forward. We will ensure that the most up-to-date asset management plan is posted, and then we can all go forward with confidence. So I would appreciate that if council would consider that.
Very good. Excellent. Deputy Mayor Graham?
That was the extent of my questions for the roads, but I do want to go on to another one. But if anyone else wants to talk about roads, by all means.
Floor is yours.
Okay, there you go. I think you alluded to it, Ahmad, but one of the things that I just wanted further clarification on is how growth is captured and factored in, because obviously there's DC revenues that are a component of the conversation, but also specifically for the water and sanitary component. I mean, there's a reason and a justification why the municipality has been moving forward with a deficit position and restricting increases on the rates due to the stalling that we've been dealing with from housing developments like Tower Hill North that have taken years longer than we ever anticipated. So the intention behind that is that, we're trying to buffer the existing ratepayers from bearing an undue and unintended burden of funding the fixed costs of that asset that was intended to be funded by more homes that would be accommodated by the system. So, when we talk about increasing rates by 4.6%, I just don't know if that's encapsulating or working maybe backwards from the end, or how growth and the continuing growth and the rate that would be more accumulated with more houses paying into the fixed rate, how that's captured in the proposed increases.
For you, Mr. Mayor, to Deputy Mayor, and that's a great question. I will say that right off the bat, I think for the purposes of the AMP and to meet the regulation, we didn't factor those in. The idea is that we factored in the current asset inventory as it is. So growth assets were not included. And as per the regulation for the next 2024 and 2025 requirements, it's only requiring municipalities that have a population of, I believe, over 25,000 for them to have a kind of robust section and detailed kind of explanation on how growth is affecting the infrastructure. So I wouldn't say that's particularly applicable to Township's case. In summary, we didn't really factor in any growth assets per se. It was just mostly on the current asset portfolio as it is, and as I think mentioned in the AMP also.
So just to clarify then on a more specific and isolated example, so the 4.6% proposed increase over the next 15 years doesn't factor in the capacity or the more homes coming online to share in that additional.
No, that's correct. It would just it's factoring in the current infrastructure as it is today, or as it is according to the asset inventory. And then of course, when the infrastructure.
So just to clarify,
yep,
there is existing infrastructure that is built and funded somewhat through debentures based on growth allocation and additional capacity. So there is existing infrastructure that is servicing a certain amount of homes that are bearing the burden of that infrastructure now, right? So it's not DC components there is a DC component to the debenture, but we're buffering the existing ratepayers because there will be more systems online that will help fund that deficit. So I'm not talking about the new infrastructure. I'm talking about the existing plant specifically, so that we don't want to be overburdening the existing ratepayers. We want all of the ratepayers on that system to contribute to it in a staggered and appropriate manner. It's just we've been caught up in delays with the actualization of those users. And it doesn't sound like there's a recognition of that in the forecast suggesting, we all understand we're at a deficit, but we're at a deficit for what I think is an appropriate purpose.
Correct. I don't think it factors that in. And I think so, as best as I can say from basing it off of the AMP and the inventory, I wouldn't say that's factored in.
Okay.
Like I said, it's the current asset inventory as it is, and yeah.
Yeah, it's more about the calculation of the increase. Like 15 years of a 4.6% increase is significant.
I agreed, but yeah, you're right. So I mean, I'm trying to find a counter to that, but because we're just sticking with the asset inventory that is, there, and that obviously will change, so that will likely require an update to the A&P when there is a significant update, or as more like you said, as more as more residents come into play and share that burden. But yeah, I would say it's sticking with just the inventory as it is, and with whatever information we have available at this time. Kimberly might be able to answer better to that, I think. So I'll let her speak to it.
Thank you, Ahmad. Through the mayor to all of council, I just wanted to reiterate as well that when we're looking at the AMP, the information is coming, you'll hear us often referencing coming through citywide. So it's the database management system that we use for all of our assets. So when the water, wastewater user rates and the projection and the future capital that's required is pulled, that data is pulled from that same database. So the water and the sanitary deficits that are being reported here at the next 5 year will be brought back up. But as you know, in the water, wastewater user rates, we already have a built-in component for future growth. So it's not tax funded. It's not necessarily going to be an automatic increase. And that's why throughout the report, we reference back the deficits related to the water and the sanitary will be brought forward in our next review of the user fees and charges. Because it's coming from the same place. The last time we did the reviews, we didn't have necessarily all the assets in like they are today. So that information will come forward, but I don't think the deficit is as large as what is being anticipated here. But this is an asset management plan, which tells you what we currently have and what deficit exists today and what that deficit looks like if we project it forward. But it's not a planning for a future rate. So I think knowing that this information, the AMP plays into the water, wastewater user fee review that's done once every 5 years, that information will be updated. At that same time, all the growth projections like we normally see in the user fees and charges bylaw will be there, and this information can be evaluated together. It's not quite the same as the tax funded, because when it's tax rate funded, we don't set the rates years and years in advance, and it's a different process. So we tried to stipulate that or emphasize that in the report so that you knew this wasn't going to be an automatic 4.9% increase on rates by any means. That's not how this is.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Kimberly, and that's exactly, we know that being in the weeds of this conversation for years and years and years, but when we have documentation and presentations that are often more easily circulated and digested by the general public, we need to have caveats about that clarification and where we can and make it digestible as possible, because, those are the images and slides that get circulated, and they're contentious and they shouldn't be inflammatory without the full context. And I think we can include that context, whether it's I'm not one of those people that say it's got to be 12 slides or bust. You know what I mean? I'm happy to add slides that add clarity. And I think we just need to, especially when we're dealing with bigger picture documentation and sensitive subject matter like this, we should take that opportunity.
Very good. Any further questions, members of council? Deputy Mayor Graham, do you want to put forward a resolution then encapsulating what we've talked about?
Yeah, so I think for the purposes of not losing any eligibility, we're going to be receiving the report for information and posting and also accepting both recommendations and approving the posting of the asset management plan on the township website. How would you like to encapsulate the further revisions and investigation? And that's where I'm looking to the clerk for any direction.
I'm thinking that in light of today's discussion, that modifications will be made, and at a subsequent meeting, it will be brought back for further review. It's more along what I was thinking, unless Ms. Page has something further.
I wasn't sure if, for instance, Wayne needed specific instruction for that component of the investigation, but I'll defer to the clerk on that.
Mayor McFadden to Deputy Mayor Graham, I have quickly written what the mayor has added as recommendation number 3. I would look to Ms. Pope as well as Mr. Hancock and potentially Ms. Hurley to see if there's any additional clarification that we need, or if we believe we can go back to the live stream and seek all the clarification that we need.
Ms. Pope, that's reasonable?
Would you like to just read that third recommendation, sorry, for the benefit of all of us before we proceed?
Sure, Ms. Page.
Staff will report back with a modified asset management plan for the Township of Cavan-Monaghan at a later date.
Could we change the word modified to updated?
Yes, updated in light of today's conversation.
Thank you.
In light of the council discussion.
I will make that motion.
Very good.
All of them.
And we got Councillor Shaw second to get. Mr. Hancock, is that okay?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I was just, the only question I had was posting on the township website. And I think Kimberly mentioned that we could post after we did the update. And I was wondering if that made, we have 2 recommendations, receive as information, and then the posting of the asset management plan to the website. And since we're going to go through this process of a projected change there to 2026, does it make sense to hold off on the posting to the website until we've done that? That's the only question I had.
Through you, Mayor McFadden, it would be beneficial if we posted this version. This is what is being approved of by council today, but we could definitely put the motion number under recommendation number 3. We could definitely put that on the website indicating that it is being amended and reviewed or updated, I believe is the word we chose, to include revisions, and that the next update will be provided and posted to the website. We should really post to the website anything that is current. So if today this is being approved, we really should post it today, and then we'll post the next one when it's available.
Mayor Graham?
Just a question, and I'm good with that, Kimberly. That makes sense to me. With regards to meeting the deadline, or the justification is the purpose of meeting the deadline, what's encapsulated in the recommendations meet that deadline alone, or is there's no submission that's required? It simply has to be done and posted?
That is correct.
Okay, fair enough. As long as we're good then. Okay, then I'll make that motion then. We're all good.
Very good. And we have the seconder from Councillor Shaw. No further discussion. Madam Clerk, record a vote.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Shaw,
Yes.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
and Councillor Huntley.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Thank you, Kimberly. Thank you, Ahmad. Next item is Report Finance 2022-11 Property Tax Arrears Update. Ms. Pope.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm really hoping this one doesn't take as long as I want to. This is a good news story, I think. So hopefully everything will be okay. So this is our property tax arrears update report. As you know, through the budget process, and as I was reporting on COVID, we were talking about the receivables and improvements happening there due to the pandemic. If we could just scroll down to financial impact, please, on page 2, I believe. Thank you. So the threshold, according to the Municipal Finance Officers Association, is that we should be less than 10% of our total taxes receivable, also known as the level of tax arrears. And we are at 6.5%, which is below the low category of 10%. As you can see there, they say that if you're between 10 and 15%, you're moderate, and high is greater than 15%. Just looking at that schedule alone, we've broken out the portions which are now eligible for bailiff action, which we will send off. That's 310,000. The 66 accounts eligible for tax registration sale will start the process. Most of them, once the other parties receive the notices, things do progress. Either properties are sold by the actual owners themselves, or the people that are on title, or the registered owners on title, or the mortgage companies will often get into place there to ensure those are up to date. So that's that other 366,000. So just the bailiff and the tax portion is 676. We have current taxes receivable, but they're not in arrears yet, so they're current years. So what was levied in January would include February and May 31st installment due dates, but they're current year. They're not considered eligible for tax sale or tax registration. So our total is $1.2 million, and we are at the 6.5% level. So that is a good news story.
Very good. Questions from members of council? Seeing none. Oh, go ahead, Deputy, or sorry, Kyle, gotcha again. Go ahead, Councillor Huntley.
Thank you, Chair. You refresh my memory, Kimberly. I believe that was it 2 years ago we were at 22% during COVID. Is that the number I remember?
I would need to pull up. No, if we were 22%, we would be only talking about bailiff and tax registration alone and being an increase year over year. We've never been at 22% for a total taxable receivables. I can definitely do the calculation and go back over those 2 years and follow up with council either by email. I just don't have those numbers at my disposal today, but that would send a huge red flag, and the auditors would have mentioned that through our financial statement reporting to council. So no, we've never been at that level, but I could definitely find it for you.
It would be informational. Yeah, it would be
Sure.
nice.
I can follow up with an email.
I just remember it being pretty high a couple of years ago.
Very good. And do you want that property taxes and the water wastewater as well? Both separate?
If we can get them, yeah, that'd be good.
Okay, very good. Any other questions? If not, a motion to receive that report and accept the recommendation. Deputy Mayor Graham, Councillor Shaw, Madam Clerk, prepare to vote.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
and Councillor Shaw.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Okay, I'm going to call for just a quick recess and then we'll be back. Give us 5 minutes. All right, we got 4 out of 5, 4.5, I guess, out of 5. We still need Bill. I guess we need 6. Yes, 6. There we go. Now we got 6 out of 6. Excellent. Ready, Madam Clerk? And first up is it going to be Karen or John or both that are presenting? I see Karen is on.
Mayor McFadden, I don't see Mr. Conley on the call, so it'll just be Miss Ellis.
Okay, very good. All right, well, then our next report is item 11.4, Report Planning 2022-36, County of Peterborough Official Plan. Ms. Ellis.
Mayor McFadden, members of council, planning report number 2022-36 is before you today with a number of recommendations about the draft Peterborough County Official Plan. So the recommendations include the following: that the following comments be forwarded to Peterborough County for review and consideration. Firstly, that they revise the table of contents to include the list of schedules. Secondly, that section 2.2 be revised to be more flexible to allow delegated authorities and municipal councils to impose site plan control as a condition of consent. Thirdly, the removal of section 3.13 related to the urban fringe area because it is not necessary given the Planning Act requirements for circulation, or alternatively exempt Cavan Monaghan Township from the policy. Number 4, revise the agricultural system mapping for Cavan Monaghan Township to include the lands between Cedar Valley Road and Larmer Line, between Hutchison Drive and County Road 28, and between Highway 115 and the CPR tracks, between Highway 7 and Brown Line, in the agricultural designation. Number 5, support the revisions to section 5.4.2 of the official plan with regard to the future servicing of a rural settlement. Number 6, revise section 5.7.2 to permit local municipalities to regulate the number of home industry employees who do not reside in the dwelling through local zoning bylaws. Number 7, support section 5.9 regarding the healthy community policies. Number 8, revise section 6.2 to add the natural heritage system overlay to the township schedules, or revise the wording in the section to direct readers to the county natural heritage system map. And number 9, to revise section 10.2.7 to confirm that an official plan amendment is not required to permit obstacles above 234.9 meters above sea level, provided the Peterborough Airport is satisfied that the proposed development will not adversely affect airport interests. Those are all comments that go to Peterborough County, and the second recommendation applies to the Township of Cavan Monaghan, and that recommendation is that the Township Site Plan Control Area Bylaw be updated to apply site plan approval to development on or near high to extreme risk for wildland fire based on the findings of wildland fire assessments. So the recommendations before you today, Council, are the result of a review of the draft county official plan. So it's about 250 pages long. And the items that I've highlighted are, in my opinion, information and policies that require some input from you or require you to be aware of what is happening in the county official plan. Comments from the township are required by tomorrow to meet the county's timeline. So having said that, I will open it up for questions.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Ellis. And I will remind everyone, this is the culmination of the better part of 3 years. Karen, you would know closer to the days than I am, but I'm just going to go with at least 3 years of consultations with the TAC meetings and all of the various background that's brought us to this point. So I sincerely appreciate it. It's a lot for you to go through. It's also a lot for us to go through too. And I can't stress enough the importance of this document for development and the community as a whole as we move forward. So with that, I will open it up for questions and comments from members of council. Deputy Mayor Graham.
Thanks, through you, Mayor. Before I turn it back to you, one of the questions that I have, Karen, is with regards to the definition of restrictive, and in regards to the, I think, I'm still getting my mind around the interrelation between ROP being separate from the counties and how, obviously we still need to be consistent with that document. I guess what is the actual definition that planning uses to decide what might be more restrictive than others? Because to me, that seems to have either a lot of opportunity or a lot of complication as something that we should be very meticulous about moving forward. And I didn't know if after that sort of explanation, you might have a comment as to how we perceive the county document in relation to, you know, some of the restrictive caveats that we might be bound by unnecessarily or otherwise.
Through you, Mayor McFadden, to Deputy Mayor Graham and members of council. The wording more restrictive is a wording that you generally find in upper tier official plans. So maybe the best way to explain that type of policy is to give you an example. Firstly, I'll premise everything just so everyone is aware that we do have a hierarchy of planning documents that you're aware of. So provincial policy is at the top of the pile in terms of the provincial policy statement. Our official plan and our decisions regarding land use planning matters have to be consistent with that document. Then we've got the growth plan and the green belt, etc. Those are provincial plans, and our official plan has to conform to those plans. Then you've got the county official plan and then the township's official plan. So there's a lot of layers in land use planning world today. So official plans have to conform to the growth plan and be consistent with the PPS. So that's what Peterborough County is going to do. We're going to do the same thing when we do our own official plan. Having said that, there are certain areas in an official plan that are more flexible than others. So if, let's use for an example, severance policy in a settlement area like Millbrook, county official plan could say that you could have up to 5 severances before you need to go by plan of subdivision. That's not enshrined in any of the provincial documents. That's a number that the county feels is appropriate. Cavan Monaghan could make the decision that 5 severances is too much. So we could be more restrictive and say you can have a maximum of 3 before you need a plan of subdivision.
Mm-hmm. But in that instance, it's literally just the number.
In that instance, it could be the number.
Yeah. Okay.
But there are other applications of that more restrictive. The key thing to remember is that all of our decisions have to conform to the document before us in terms of our own land use planning documents, but also the counties and the provinces. So
it only adds, it can't circumvent in a way, despite having all, competing restrictions. Because I could see a scenario in which elements of a policy or bylaw are more restrictive, but have opportunities for, could require more of certain restrictions and less of others in the same policy. You know what I mean?
Through Mayor McFadden to Deputy Mayor Graham, I'm not entirely sure,
okay.
But I think as we go through our exercise of updating our own official plan, it could be, council could direct staff to identify those areas where there is flexibility in terms of being more restrictive than the county.
Thank you.
Very good. Further questions from members of council on the official plan? I have a long list, and I don't want to go through item by item. However, the comments are due by tomorrow, so I'm in somewhat of a predicament in that in order to get the comments into the county on behalf of council, I need to go through the list. Now, I can go through some high level, or I can go through all in the details. We will be here all night. But if I can get some leniency from council, I am scheduled to meet with county staff and our staff, and Deputy Mayor Graham has been included on it as well, to formulate our discussion and concerns and issues that we may have so that we can better articulate them to be brought forward to county council, and given that tomorrow is the final day. So I'm okay with that. I can certainly go through some high levels and I won't spend any time on them today. But because it is such an important document, this is one of those documents you do need to get into the weeds, and you need to be very clear and articulate the specific clauses, et cetera, that are the concerns very clearly. You can't just broad brush it. It doesn't work that way. So it's challenging. It's challenging to come forward as literally just a report to provide this sort of feedback. So I'm open to discussion. I'm certainly willing and able to go through each of the line numbers. but I'm certain several of you aren't going to want to hear me go through 100 different points and articulate how the verbiage should work. And so I can completely understand and respect that. So I'm looking to council how you wish for me to proceed. Deputy Mayor.
So maybe what we could do for, I think this is one of those instances where I kind of got to defer to staff to sort of instruct us as how to move forward, because in a sense, you know, I don't think there's going to be much in the way of complications with, they need council endorsement in order to be the township's comments. But if we don't have any issues with the staff comments before us today, then we can submit those in their entirety. And then, but I'm kind of think staff has to kind of guide council in how we can endorse or dispute any of the, like, any, if there is a dispute, any of your comments in an efficient way at this point. I don't know.
Yeah, I've gone through each of the recommendations, and some of them I'm okay with, some of them I have questions. I can start with those and go through. That might be a good start. And then there's other ones that I've raised which have nothing to do with the comments or concerns that have been raised, but I do believe they're in the interest of the Township of Cavan-Monaghan. I've got other issues that I'll raise at County Council relative to my role as a County Councillor. But I do have quite a few comments that I believe are of the utmost importance to the township, as in my township roles, hence the predicament in trying to respect everybody's time and the fact that we're still only about halfway through this council meeting.
Yeah.
So we can start with that list. Does that help? I can start with that list.
I still think we need
just a recommendation.
I just want staff to tell us how we're going to do this. Like, how, whether it's the CAO or the clerk, I think we need to be told, because they just want to make sure it's above board.
Very good. Ms. Hurley?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I think the best thing to do, I do agree, go through the recommendations that are before you today in the report. Let's talk about those and see if we can go forward. At least if that's the case, then we can forward on these comments. I think the question that you have is, with the meeting tomorrow, you know, you may be, you know, requesting that the county either provide additional information or remove something, or consideration, obviously, to remove something. And we won't know that until we have that meeting tomorrow. So there was a lot of questions or comments that you had suggested with me or previously to today's meeting. And so we have organized a meeting with the County of Peterborough. I thank them very much, as well as our staff, to coming together for tomorrow. So we are meeting at 10 o'clock for that. But I think if we start with this, let's go with these recommendations first. And then anything additional will be as it plays out in the discussion with the County of Peterborough tomorrow.
And then if council's more comfortable, I can certainly call for a special meeting tomorrow at the end of the day, 24 hours, in order to approve what we have gone through. If council's more comfortable with that, I'm fine with that too, recognizing that tomorrow's the day that all comments have to be in.
Or if I may, through you, Mr. Chairman, is if council gives mayor and the deputy mayor, you know, support to bring any comments forward with the County of Peterborough. Maybe that's a motion you can consider today.
Absolutely.
Then you wouldn't have to reconvene tomorrow, because I think it's going to be very tight.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Deputy Mayor Graham?
You wouldn't happen to have a summary, like, have you collected these on a document that maybe we could take a 10-minute recess or another 10-minute recess, and just, if you're concerned, but if you don't have it organized that way, then don't worry about it.
No, I have a book with all those.
I expected.
I can't even photocopy it and send it to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, let's go through this list first, and then we'll
okay, very good.
How long that takes.
Yeah, we'll start there and we'll see how we go. So revise the table of contents to include the list of schedules as item 1. I don't have an issue with that. It needs to be updated, so I agree. Revise schedule 2.2 to be more flexible to allow delegated authorities and municipal councils to impose site plan control as a condition of consent. I think I just need an explanation and clarity on that one. It's not that I'm opposed to it. I just need an explanation what's not in there that we're trying to suggest.
To you, Mayor McFadden, to members of council. So that section I'm recommending be revised to allow delegated authorities, because Cavan-Monaghan has a delegation of authority bylaw. So it allows the CAO and the executive director of planning to provide comment directly to the county without it going to council. We want those delegated authorities to have the right to impose site plan control as a condition of consent. The planning department staff don't want to have to bring a consent to county or to council, sorry, to impose that condition. So this is a change that we view as being an efficiency thing.
Okay, so it's just simply the line site plan control may be imposed subject to approval by local municipal council. Maybe add, for example, add the verbiage or
delegated authority
along those lines. Okay,
yes.
Very good. Thank you. Remove section 3.13 relative to the urban fringe. I support that. Revise the agricultural system mapping for Cavan Monaghan Township to include the lands between Cedar Valley Road and Larmer Line between Hutchison and County Road 28. I looked at that on a map and that makes sense. I understand that. This next one, I can't get my head around to understand what property we're talking about. And it might be helpful if we bring up the map, which is on page 466 of today's agenda. I don't understand between Highway 115 and CPR tracks. I'm good so far. And then between Highway 7 and Brown Line, but Brown Line is perpendicular to Highway 7. So I don't understand what it is that we're coloring in.
Through you, Mayor McFadden, to members of council. So I'm suggesting that the lands north of Highway 115 and east of Highway 7 up to Brown Line. So it would keep the lands that are subject to the MZO outside of the agricultural system. But the rest of the lands that are currently white on that map would be brown.
So sorry, but what does Brown Line have to do with it? Isn't it east of Highway 7, north of 115 and south of the CPR? Is that not what we're talking about? I'm missing what Brown Line has to do with this.
Through you, Mayor McFadden, to members of council, Brown Line is the boundary. Like the CPR line goes north of Brown Line. So east of the CPR tracks is Brown Line. So I want to do everything south of there.
But the CPR line is south of Brown Line.
But it crosses Brown Line and goes north of Brown Line.
Oh, I see.
So through you, Mayor McFadden, to members of council, the property that was subject to the MZO,
yes,
that you supported would remain outside.
So it's everything but that little wee corner up there.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, so it's north of the 115, south of the CPR and Brown Line,
yes,
bounded by Highway 7 and Airport Road?
Yes.
Okay, all right, I understand that. So maybe just to modify that description or a suggestion on that description, because you want it bounded by Airport Road, correct?
Yes. Okay.
Okay. I didn't see in my copy the number 5, which is support of the revisions to section 5.4.2 with regards to future servicing of a rural settlement. But I believe that's what we spoke to, and Brian and Ian were going to provide that to you. So I'm assuming that's what was discussed, and I'm okay with it. I haven't seen it. It's in your report, but I didn't see it in the documents that I was reviewing.
Through you, Mayor McFadden, to members of council, I believe it's a late addition, so it won't be in the draft, but they did provide the wording and we've reviewed it and are satisfied that it meets our long-term interests.
Super. Number 7, support section 5.9 regarding healthy community policies. My concern was as it relates to the large-scale renovations whereby LEED was being imposed and it was a requirement as opposed to recommended, which I don't know that we necessarily have the authority to do.
Through you, Mayor McFadden, to members of council, this is something that we have a similar policy in our current official plan, that we do require commercial industrial buildings over a certain size to be LEED compliant, or we have taken a liberal interpretation as long as they can show it doesn't have to be a certified LEED, but it has to have components therein that are what's the word I'm looking for? That that lead us to lead
Lead
standards.
standard,
Yes,
Michelle, is lead to components to a lead standard.
yes. But it
Yes.
doesn't have to be lead certified.
Correct. So essentially that's what we did with the CMCC. We're not
Yes.
technically certified, but we brought it to that standard, and I'm okay with that. But under this, it actually goes as far as the proponent shall submit an application to the Canada Green Building Council for LEED certification following the completion of all works. It's actually requiring the full LEED certification, which is a step too far in my interpretation. So I don't support that, recognizing the overhead and everything that's involved in it. When somebody's trying to do the renovation, we can certainly put the current wording that we have in there, encouraging those to do it similar to what we did in our own building, but requiring the actual certification is taking it one step too far, in my opinion. I'm not sure how the rest of council feels. Councillor Huntley, sorry. No.
Yeah, well, through you, Chair, I agree. Like the LEED certification it's pretty tough to get. I mean, being as LEED compliant as possible is definitely a better standard to try to hit.
So similar wording to what we already have in our current official plan to be brought forward as opposed to requiring the actual certification.
Yep.
So the next one is 8. Revise section 6.2 to add natural heritage system overlay to the township schedules, or revise the wording in the section to direct readers to the county natural heritage system map. I'm okay with that. We're dealing with maps that are at the county level, so it covers all of us. But I noticed with the the source water protection, it covers all municipalities but ours, and I understand that's because we're not in the official plan, but we still have ours identified on some of those maps. The one on Lansdowne Street is on the Selwyn map as well as the Autonomy South Monaghan map. So does that create a problem because they should be referring to ours, or should they be including it similar to what they're doing in section 8? Should they be including a map that has our wells identified on it? Because right now it doesn't appear in the county official plan that they have ours identified, even though we know they are, and there's no reference to refer to the township's official plan.
Through you, Mayor McFadden, to members of council, I would suggest that the other maps be revised to remove it because source water protection is a local responsibility, and we will be having maps within our local official plan like we do right now. That will continue. So
so maybe verbiage to the effect of removing the source water protection area on Lansdowne Street from the Autonomy South Monaghan and the Selwyn maps. And that was it with relative to your comments, Ms. Ellis. Thank you.
Do you want a motion for those then, Scott?
Sure.
I don't know how we're going to do this next part. So.
Ms. Page or Ms. Hurley, how do you want to deal with that? That's addressing the comments that were made in the report. I've still got others from the report, but they weren't recommendations. Do you want to include these in because it was technically part of the report?
I think that makes sense.
So for example, on page 459, across the county, a minimum of 15% of all residential development in any given year must occur within the delineated built-up areas of each serviced settlement area. We recognize and understand that we're aiming for 15% over the lifespan of the plan, but my concern is with the verbiage, the way it's written. It's suggesting it almost has to balance out each year. So we know right off the bat we've got about 1,500 homes in the Millbrook settlement area and 600 over at Fourth of Downs. The way that reads would require for the balance we'd have a lot of infilling development that must occur in Lakefield and Norwood and Havelock and some in Millbrook before we could ever proceed with our developments that are going on in Millbrook and Fraserville. So I don't think it was intended that way, but that's certainly how it's written, to balance year over year.
Through you, Mayor McFadden, to members of council, it is a goal in the official plan that's what we're aiming for sure. It is a number that is across Peterborough County. So it will be across, just to be clear, it will be across the 4 service settlement areas within Peterborough County because they're the only ones with the delineated belt boundary. we've always had a goal to build a certain amount of the new development within the built boundary. Historically, we probably haven't met that goal, and the county has not historically said we can't develop outside of the built boundary until you meet that goal. So I think it's in there to encourage more intensification within the built boundary. So, and that intensification does include things like accessory apartments.
Yeah, I guess the way it's worded though is it says it must occur, and must occur is different than a target. And so that would provide every ability for the county to hold up specific developments in light of the fact that some other municipality isn't doing infilling. Because we already know that we only have a couple 115 residential units within Millbrook over the entire 30 years. So there we are, we sit. And I know it's the unintended consequences of documents like this that provide that leverage later on that can hold up developments. And I think it's unnecessary. We've got the infrastructure ready for these developments, and we shouldn't be penalized because some other municipality hasn't done the appropriate infilling, as it's worded with the must occur. So I think must occur is very worded very strongly, and that was where the intent was over the horizon of the plan.
Through you, Mayor McFadden, to members of council, I think that the wording probably comes from the growth plan, because the growth plan does require minimum intensification and density targets.
So then for our meeting tomorrow, then just to confirm, so I would like to see where it's included in that verbiage or legislation, that it's that minimum percentage is in any given year must occur. Because my understanding, anything I've seen is that it's over the lifespan of the plan, which is 30 years, not year over year must occur.
Oh, I think through you, Mayor McFadden, to members of council, I think you're correct that it is over the life of the plan. I think it's incumbent upon all of us to not back end it and wait till the 11th hour. I think it's something that we encourage people to do, and I think we are starting to see more and more interest in things like accessory apartments, which will contribute to our targets. And then, there are some vacant developable lands that will be greenfield development as well.
Deputy Mayor Graham?
Yeah, to Miss Ellis, I don't think that's the intention to back end it. It's the opposite. It's to not cite language to prohibit other forms of development because a certain individual characteristic or target isn't met. So it has nothing to do with mitigating the actual accumulation or the meeting of the 215 units. It's that if in a given year, I'm trying to do the quick math, so let's say 33 of the units, if our 1 year of 15% aren't completed, well then other developments might not be approved, or might not move forward because we haven't fulfilled that criteria, I think is the intention.
In other words, we know that we've got residential subdivision for 700, just for argument's sake, 750 for Tower Hill North, 750 for Vargas and CSU. So there's 1,500 and 500 and Fourth of Down. So there's 2,000. But before those can be processed, there will need to be 300 infilling completed year over year. And so I would hate to see our developments held up because some other municipality hasn't done their infilling. We don't even have 300 infilling over the course of our entire plan. So it's not even like we can do it. We can encourage 300 because we don't have the space to do 300. So my issue is that what the provincial policies and legislation states versus what the county is requiring are significantly different. And the essence of what the province is asking for is over the life of the plan. And what the county is asking for is year over year. And that's significantly different.
Okay, so if I could just clarify then through you, Mayor McFadden, tomorrow, so you asked a question about tomorrow's meeting, and what is your question?
So I thought you'd stated that was the intention of the provincial policy was the year over year. So I said, that's okay, then just bring forward the legislation so I can see it, because my understanding is it's over the duration of the 30 years. If it's year over year and that's what's in the legislation, then that's what we need to abide by. But if that's something that the county has added, I absolutely vehemently disagree, and it should not be year over year.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay. So that policy that we spoke about earlier, when the servicing of a rural settlement area is upgraded to full municipal water and sewer, it will be recognized as a settlement area as defined in this plan and subject to the policies contained in section 5.3.2 and 5.3.3. And that's the policy that we work very closely with the county for them to devise the wording so that we could understand at what point would it suddenly become a serviced urban center versus unserviced. So that was great. My question is, and I know this is one of those chicken and eggs, at what point, so the services are clearly going to be there before the homes, because you have to have the services available in order to build the homes, because they're all going to be on municipal water and sewer, and well, private water and sewer. So at what point throughout this application process is their requirements going to be different? Because when they're developing in so-called rural settlement area, that's different than an urban settlement area, but they won't be an urban settlement area until they put the pipes in the ground, at which point then they're already proceeding with the subdivision. So I'm struggling with trying to understand. I would hate for them to be submitting things under rural, and then after it takes effect as being an urban, then well, now the rules have changed, so now they got to comply with something else when it comes to, for example, the site plan or the subdivision agreements, etc., because now it's a different set of rules. So how can you apply the urban settlement rules while it's still an urban, recognizing where it's eventually heading, or how would that work?
Through you, Mayor McFadden, to members of council. So a rural settlement is already established and there are uses within that settlement area. If it's upgraded to the full municipal water and sewer, it would have to be a municipal exercise. So in my opinion, that exercise would have to be in progress, almost to the point of completion and provincial approval before you could entertain an application for a plan of subdivision that relies on that municipal service level. So I would suggest to you that once that process is in place to provide those full municipal services, and we were far enough through that process that we knew we were going to have approval, an applicant could then come forward with an application based on full municipal service levels as opposed to private service levels.
Yes, because I can see the applications both coming through at the same time, because nobody is going to go to the trouble of providing the background for the servicing and have that almost near completion without having a guarantee that they're going to be able to have the subdivision that goes with the servicing. So I can see that they're going to want to put both through at the same time, but the subdivision itself is coming in technically as a rural settlement area, not an urban, but they're going to be designing to the urban standard. So I'm just trying to figure out how that would play out.
Through you, Mayor McFadden, to members of council, it might be something that we want to talk to the county about tomorrow as well.
Yes. Okay. Very good. The part about the natural heritage system, and this was Deputy Mayor raised this earlier when it was relative to the development charges, but we have a map overlay that's going to be different. And I didn't see it because, again, it's a recent modification, but we're going to have a different map that goes in. But will the natural heritage system respect the new urban settlement area that we're defining as a township? In other words, any properties to the north or to the east that may or may not be identified, would they would not have that mapping because now they're inside that urban boundary? Is that how that would work?
Through you, Mayor McFadden, to members of council. So the natural heritage system mapping that has been proposed by Peterborough County to date is the portion that applies to Cabot-Monaghan is attached to the report. So it is an overlay, and that information will have to be included in the township's official plan. With this draft mapping, you will notice that the urban settlement area of Millbrook, plus the rural settlement areas like Ida and Cavan, the natural heritage system has been buffered around those areas. So features will still be identified, and when I say features, I mean things like wetlands and watercourses, will still be identified in those settlement areas, and buffers will be applied, but the natural heritage system mapping goes around those.
Okay. And then the same thing with regards to the agricultural system. Will it be modified as we expand the urban settlement area as part of this as a result of our new map? Because right now it stops just north of Larmer, and it may very well go further north, and it may very well go further east. And would that be reflective on the map that's on page 466?
To you, Mayor McFadden, to members of council, yes. When the township updates our official plan, some of these areas that you see as brown right now will then be part of the rural employment area. Part will be included in the Millbrook settlement area. Those will all unfold at the time we update our plan.
Okay, so we don't need to worry about updating the agricultural maps system now, because I noticed the property on Sire Line is also marked agricultural, but that will get covered off when we're doing our own local official plan.
Through you, Mayor McFadden, to members of council, yes. And there is a policy in place in the county official plan, particular to Cavan Monaghan, that says when we update our official plan, that we will have the ability to massage the designations and include like our rural employment, our commercial, whatever else we want to have. So that policy has been put in the county official plan directly to accommodate Cavan Monaghan's official plan update. Having said that, the wording has been generated by the county to provide us that flexibility, but the county official plan does have to be adopted by county council and approved by the province. But that is the intention, yes.
And it does specifically include agricultural mapping.
Through you, Mayor McFadden, to members of council. So when we do our official plan, we will have an agricultural designation that will net out some of these other areas. The agricultural system mapping is a requirement of the growth plan. So Peterborough County has to apply it in Cavan Monaghan, but it does not translate to a designation for us. Where the other municipalities in Peterborough County, it translates into an agricultural designation.
Very good. On page 463, there was a mention with regards to the funding for watershed management plans, et cetera. And still in the county official plan, it still has the wording when financing becomes available, but Deputy Mayor Graham and myself passed a motion that I believe we should be A, providing response back from Cavan Monaghan, and B, it should be enshrined back into the county official plan, whereby we're not waiting for monies to be available, but the motion actually had that the study be started in 2023 and have the county development process continue as it has, not waiting for the plan, but use the plan when it is complete to streamline the process, and that $1 million be allocated in development charges in order to fund it. So I think that needs to be reflected, and it should come from our township as well, given the fact that we're requesting sub-watershed plans, et cetera, from developers. We've already covered that off at county council, and I think we needed a reminder that there's already been direction provided for that. Most importantly, that it has to start in 2023.
Okay, through you, Mayor McFadden, to members of council, can you provide me with the wording from that motion?
Yeah.
Perfect, okay.
So again, this is on page 463 of your report. Stormwater management policies are outlined in section 10.3.1 of the plan. Subsection 6 requires local municipalities to develop stormwater master plan or equivalent in service settlement areas as funding becomes available. This policy may affect future municipal budgets. So is this something that's recoverable through DCs? Is this something that we should be incorporating into our DCs now that we've got them open? And B, do we have any idea how much this is going to cost? Because this seemed to come out of, I didn't see it coming. And furthermore, when something says when funding becomes available, usually means it never comes available, so you never really do it. So I'm not sure how we're going to move forward with that.
Through you, Mayor McFadden, to members of council, there really hasn't been any discussion about how we might move forward with that particular policy. It's something that I think the Director of Public Works and other township staff need to talk about how to implement it and how to fund that moving forward.
And is that worthy, given that our DCs are still open? Ms. Hurley, should we be raising this with Watson and Associates to find out if that's something that we can include in that study? I hate to keep that thing open, but the longer it's open, the more we keep adding to it because we find out more things that we may or may not be responsible for.
Through you, Mayor McFadden, at this point in time, you have to remember that this is a policy that's in the draft plan. It still has to be approved by Peterborough County and the province. So I would hate to see you, because we don't know what the ultimate policy is going to be. So if in fact it did get approved in the end, I think you would rather amend the DC bylaw at that time if required, as opposed to holding it up at this moment.
Yeah, I guess just that it's a DC bylaw is good for 5 years. And so I would hate to have to revisit and open it back up. So my concern is just agreeing to something when funding becomes available, knowing that funding won't be available unless the province is going to step forward, which I don't see them stepping forward for this particular item. So you're right, it's a chicken the egg exercise. Funding won't just become available. Go ahead, Deputy Mayor Graham.
Oh, in regards to that funding, though, through you, Mayor, we did increase the threshold that was being set aside or recognized by the county to $1 million, right? So I know that's barely sufficient to do one or a portion of the overall study that's required and referred to in the legislation. But I guess I think it might almost be more, I don't know if we can affect that portion of the actual funding, like you said, because it's completely insufficient despite going up to $1 million. But I think it might more be, like you said, a chicken and the egg thing that we might need to, via staff, follow up as to when those funds are going to start or when those efforts are going to be started, and request that due to the planning implications in the OP process that we're going through, that our water should be one of the primary or first plans that be undertaken.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because stormwater is a different animal. Instead of being an upper tier responsibility, it's going to be lower tier. My only concern is with a 5-year plan, if we pass it now, I'm not sure how many of those homes are going to be built of the 2,000 in the next 5 years, but I'd hate to miss the opportunity to fund a stormwater management plan if you don't have the same amount of development coming forward that would be able to fund it. That's so I guess maybe just for staff to have that conversation with Watson, considering it's open, and understand, and maybe Wayne can provide some insight as to the overall cost of this. If it's not very much, then it's something that may be easily incorporated into a future budget. But again, if it's $1 million item, it's something we're going to have to plan for. And that's it specifically with regards to your report. If we're looking for a motion that covered off specifically with the report, or if you can provide me with some flexibility, I could certainly incorporate those into a much more meaningful direction tomorrow to county, because that just scratched the surface. I've got a lot more in the actual county official plan. Ms. Hurley?
For you, Mr. Chairman, are we going to make a decision? I mean, obviously you have these recommendations before you, these motions, or recommendations, excuse me. There are a couple amendments that you have identified, such as, developed to LEED standard, not necessarily certified. Are you looking, we're looking for your guidance to get recommendations supported or not supported for each one?
Well, it's going to end up with, that's a few, so it's going to be kind of confusing if we have a motion of council that supports or changes that recommendation with 5 or 6 other things, and then I bring forward about 50 more tomorrow. Is that subsequent to the request? And if it needs to be separate, then I'd suggest bringing it back to another meeting tomorrow afternoon or evening in order to go through the list of all these other ones. That's my only concern. I'm looking for some suggestion to move forward.
So
by no means were those the most important and critical ones that I wanted identified. They just happened to be part of the report, which is why I brought them forward. The rest of them have nothing to do with the report or that, but they're definitely directed to the county official plan and Cavan Monaghan.
Well, I guess my concern is, one, we can't really call a meeting tomorrow. Two, you have your meeting scheduled at 10 o'clock in the morning, and some of these your questions might be answered. Some of them are comments. Some of them, we may come out with some recommendations going forward. So are you looking for council to give you support, you and the deputy mayor support to raise any of the comments and authorize them by the Township of Cavan Monaghan? Is that what you're looking for at the meeting tomorrow?
Yes.
So that's up to council if they support that. So that's up for
Okay.
discussion.
What's council's flavor? I'm okay, I can go through them all, but I'm being honest, I probably have about 100. Councilor Huntley?
Through you, Chair, I really don't want to go through 100 points. I don't know. I guess giving you carte blanche, powers here is also a little bit scary at the same time.
Yep, I can appreciate that. And I'm totally fine with meeting tomorrow night because I can call an emergency meeting. That's not a problem, and we can still get them in for the 21st. And I can bring them back and it can be a list. We can go through them all. That's what you prefer.
I guess the deadline that's set by the county, that is to achieve their deadline of getting this thing submitted in time, I'm assuming?
They have to bring it to county council for June 29th. So everything has to be in tomorrow.
I guess I'm just kind of in a little bit of a, like, why are we back to the walls at this point? Like, I don't like being forced to make these calls this late in the game.
Yep. Ms. Hurley?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Ms. Ellis, if we meet with the county, my worry, concern somewhat is some of the answers might be answered tomorrow once we meet with, we just need the time, right?
Yep.
So I guess the question is, if we're late responding or we call a meeting or respond and provide comments at a later time, is there any flexibility that you're aware of or no? To provide comments, sorry.
Through you, Mayor McFadden, to members of council and the CIO, I think the deadline for tomorrow is so that the county consider those comments and they can revise the draft official plan one last time before it goes to county council for review and a decision. I think that until the plan is adopted by county council, you have the ability to provide comments. And I believe that even if county council decides to adopt the draft official plan, Peterborough County can request further modifications to that plan prior to it being approved by the province.
Mayor Graham?
Based on that, because I kind of think it is similar to the refinements to our map, right? Like we're able to move forward to a certain extent, but I think, to me, the only way I see it really manageable, because even I think our meeting's only been allotted an hour tomorrow. So, you're about 1.5 a minute at that rate if you're in the 100 realm, Scott. So I doubt that'll be sufficient enough for an exchange of ideas and a discussion of all the topics. So to me, it only makes sense that we're either requesting that commitment by the county to, continue to receive formal comments from the township and for it to be considered incorporated into the OP document, or we request the postponement because we're not able to sufficiently endorse and provide efficient, an acceptable or the total list of comments on a report due to insufficient time, lead time, and council, the schedule of our meetings. Like, to me, it's one of those two things. I'm sure we'll know which one the county wants to go for. I think we can all assume, but I'm not sure that might meet the requirements or I'm not sure the comfortability you might have based on some of the comments within that list to move forward with this document, unless there is a formal commitment from the county in that meeting that they will address at a future council meeting the additional comments from the township.
My concern is right now we have the urgency and we have a set of ears. Once it's passed, regardless of whether they can be included in or not, when I bring forward my list of 100 at a future council meeting whereby we've already adopted something and it's up for discussion, I'm going to get the same glazed look from everybody around the table. They're going to hear me out and then they're just going to carry on. This is really important.
I agree, but I don't think there will even be the opportunity for their staff to consider all of that long a list of comments between now and next week. So it won't, it's an impossibility in that regard. So that's why I'm saying we're either going to formally request that they postpone that, we can vote as such. I mean, we'll be the two, but we can vote to postpone it because there isn't any municipal jail that we're going to be subject to because of it. As we know, similar to the AMP, there's lots of municipalities that are very public about not meeting this deadline, and there's no real implications or drawbacks to it. So we could request that, and I'm happy with either of those opportunities, but I'm not sure once it gets posted. Like I said, to me, we'll get the same consideration if they commit to responding to a comprehensive submission from the municipality for all of our comments. That is the amount of consideration we're going to get, and whether that would have to be at a future meeting of the county, and then it's going to be down to a vote anyways of whether they want to adopt certain ones or not. If we require it to come forward at a future county meeting, which I'm sure is the option that the county's going to want.
Yeah.
But that's the most consideration I think you're going to be able to get. I don't think you're even going to get the type of consideration by trying to force it through between here and next week.
Ms. Hurley?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to council. Maybe we just do what's right for what council wishes to do. So what works with our time schedule is what I'm saying. So you defer this report right now. We have our meeting with the County of Peterborough. We go through your list of questions. Whether it's at tomorrow's meeting or the next meeting, maybe we have to have an additional meeting. I don't know at this time. And then we report back to council with what our recommendations excuse me, should be considered.
Mayor Graham?
I think I understand Ms. Hurley's comments. I think you need to approve these to be submitted and add a recommendation requesting one of the two options that I sort of presented. You're either we have an additional list that needs to come before council, or that we need a guarantee from the county that they will be considered should the document move forward as of June 29th. Or, in the absence of that, our request the county defer the adoption of the OP till a time where fulsome consultation and consideration of the comments from the municipality are heard and vetted. Because then these are lost too.
But I guess, given that I'm the one bringing them forward, these specific concerns, I am absolutely committed to. I have no issue with meeting and doing whatever I need to do and calling special meetings and going through this list. I don't want to be looked upon as being the one that's trying to delay or defer it, because that's not my intention. So my concern with saying we're asking for deferral, we're really putting a big risk out there. I've only provided response to what was in the report and what the recommendations were, but I have far more serious concerns in the document that aren't even addressed. So my concerns with putting forward anything from this council, to me, would be viewed upon by the county as being those are our most significant issues. And quite frankly, those aren't my most significant issues. So that's why I'm hesitant to put forward any.
Yeah, fair enough. I thought it would be a token gesture to try to appease and our accommodation with the latter. But
yeah, it's not easy, and none of us are trying to be difficult.
No, I understand. Yeah. Well, we got to come up with a vote. So,
Ms. Hurley?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that's why I was saying you're going to defer your report, have the meeting. We make a list of recommendations that can go forward for council. You call a special council meeting if we have to, but it won't be done tomorrow is what I'm saying.
No, that's fine, but
there's no way that we'll be able to report back, because some of your questions and comments might take some time to report on, to think about and report back. So there's a time. We are not going to meet the county's deadline. We're not going to have this done tomorrow. It's very good that we've got the opportunity to have the meeting, but I think, from your list of comments that I'm aware of right now, we'll never have those answers. And I think, in all fairness, our council needs to know exactly what your recommendations are going forward, and you need to vote on them. And to do that, we need the time to be able to present a report with a very clear recommendations for council to consider.
I agree.
Okay.
All right. So at this point, just a motion to receive this report and that the deputy mayor and myself will be meeting with township and county staff tomorrow for further discussion on the county official plan. And subsequent to that, we will call a special meeting to come back to our regular council to have further conversation relative to the outcome of that meeting. Does that make sense? Councillor Shaw, go ahead. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry, that was just, I thought that you were making a motion.
Oh, I was looking for a nod from Yvette, but I haven't gotten it yet, so she's still thinking.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to council, I think I'm fine with what you're proposing. I think it's up to council whether they agree or disagree. That's up to them to vote on that. But I do think we need time to come back to you with a full report and at least report back from our discussions respectfully with the County of Peterborough.
Absolutely. Okay. Then I'll make that a motion then, that we receive this report and that the deputy mayor and the mayor will meet with county and township staff tomorrow to discuss our issues and concerns. And subsequent to that, I will call a special meeting to come back to discuss the outcomes of that meeting in order to bring forward our recommendations for the county official plan on behalf of the township. Sorry, Cindy, I didn't write that down.
Mayor McFadden, I believe that there's enough that we can capture that. The only thing I wanted to confirm is, do you want to receive this report or defer the report?
Oh, I guess we could defer it.
Okay, that would be my only other suggestion. And the only other thing is the intent that in collaboration with the mayor, deputy mayor, and staff, that the report for that special meeting will contain the recommendations in it? Or are we going to discuss what
we're going to go through the official plan and discuss any of the items that I've flagged, or any that the deputy mayor have flagged, or if any members of council have, let us know and we'll have that conversation tomorrow. That's my intent. Ms. Hurley?
Through you, I was thinking that staff would come back with a report as an outcome from the meeting that we have, because you need to have a full staff report in front of you with recommendations for consideration.
Very good.
Perfect.
Cindy, are you okay with that?
Absolutely. That's cleaner. Absolutely. Yep.
Thank you.
Wonderful. See how we work through that? That's fantastic. Deputy Mayor Graham.
So the only caveat or contextual issue that might be, like, they have to be we have the meeting tomorrow. Great. And we go through certain things are heard, certain things aren't. The only thing that would warrant a special meeting is if they were going to be open to receiving further additional comments after the fact. Right? And if there aren't.
I think everybody has to have a little give and take on this. I think if the county's position is they're not going to take any further comments because it's too late, then we're going to go to that meeting and say, we don't support passing it this time because we got a laundry list of things we want included.
That's
a risk.
That's why I bring it up now, to say that potentially with the motion that we're passing should be a formal request of something for consideration, because it's, unless we are formally asking for it, that formal request would have to get on that agenda for the 29th. Right? Because if they could just say no, and then it's in the ether, like it's gone.
Yes. And they can do addendums to agendas. So even if it's our correspondence from our township prior to that meeting, they haven't had a chance to implement them in, but we can certainly add it as an addendum to the agenda the Monday before.
Correct.
We could even do that. Okay.
So there has to be some formality to the request, I think.
Ms. Page, just so we're clear, so I guess what we're basically asking for is that, given what's in the report, that we're asking for an extension on providing comments beyond June 21st. But prior to the June 29th meeting. That's what our goal is. And we'll certainly expedite it as quick as possible, but everybody's feet are to the fire right now, trying to get everything done at the last minute.
We would like to ask that we formally request the County of Peterborough to provide us the extension beyond June 21st, and we will provide our comments prior to the June 29th meeting.
Absolutely. That works. Yep. Ms. Ellis, is everything sounding okay so far?
Through you, Mayor McFadden, to members of council. Sure.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, I need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Shaw, Deputy Mayor Graham. Any further discussion? Don't say all those points. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Shaw,
Yes.
Councillor Belch,
Oh, you're on mute, Councillor Belch.
We.
Mayor McFadden.
Yes, motion is approved. Thank you, Karen. Moving along, Report Public Works 2022-15 Preston Road Agreement of Purchase and Sale between Orca and the Township of Cabmonaghan. With all due respect with time, any councillors have any questions on Mr. Hancock's report? None. Motion to receive the report, accept the recommendation. Deputy Mayor Graham, Councillor Huntley, Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Shaw,
Yes.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
and Deputy Mayor Graham.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Next report, Parks and Facilities 2022-01 RFP PF-22-01 Masonry Repairs and Excavation for Maple Leaf Park Shelter and Canteen. Any questions from members of council? None. Motion to receive the report and accept the recommendation. Councillor Shaw, Deputy Mayor Graham, Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Shaw,
Yes.
and Councillor Belch.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Motion to receive the unopened road and street road allowance report. Deputy Mayor Graham, Councillor Huntley, Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Shaw,
Yes.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
and Councillor Huntley.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Next report, CAO 2022-07 Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. Ms. Hurley, do you have anything to say about the report? If not, I will move to receive the report and accept the recommendation.
No, I'm fine. It's Carly though, sir.
Is it?
Yeah, Carly's on there too. She did all the work. I have to.
Oh, give credit where credit's due. Carly, do
Exactly.
you have anything to add to this report?
No, I do not. Thank
You
you.
patiently waited all day just to say that. Okay, motion to receive that report and accept the recommendation. Deputy Mayor Graham, Councillor Belch, Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
and Councillor Shaw.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Report CAO and capital status. Any items anybody wishes to talk about? If not, motion to receive that. Deputy Mayor Graham, Councillor Shaw, Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Shaw,
Yes.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
and Mayor McFadden.
Yes, motion is approved. Council Committee verbal reports. Any in the report, Councillor Belch?
Not at this time.
Nope. I will report that I'm meeting with the library board tomorrow night. Deputy Mayor Graham, anything further?
Not at this time.
Councillor Huntley?
Not at this time.
And I feel awful skipping you each time, Councillor Shaw, but you don't have any committees, but I can ask you if you have anything to add.
Not at all.
Very good. Motion to receive, nothing. Deputy Mayor Graham and Councillor Huntley. Madam Clerk, record vote.
Councillor Shaw,
Yes.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
and Deputy Mayor Graham.
Yes.
Motion is approved. There's no general business, no correspondence for information. Correspondence for action is a letter from Lumix Group in support of their bid for the Canadian FACT Future Aircraft Training Program. I would suggest that we send to Lumix a letter of support. It's fantastic for our area or region, lots of jobs, so we want to put our support behind them. So I'm confident staff can come up with a beautiful letter to provide our support. Deputy Mayor Graham, you've got your hand moved, second by Councillor Belch. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Shaw,
Yes.
and Councillor Belch.
Yes.
Motion is approved. The first
Remembering
bylaw
Mayor
we're
McFadden, yep, perfect.
we're skipping. The second bylaw, number 2022-44, being a bylaw to authorize the execution of the agreement of purchase and sale of the lands and the premises legally described as part of PIN 1,0394 LT being parts 1 and 2 of Plan 45R-17305 between the Autonomy Region Conservation Authority vendor and the Corporation of the Township of Cabmonaghan be read a first, second, third time, signed by the mayor and the clerk, and the corporate seal attached thereto, moved by Deputy Mayor Graham, seconded by Councillor Belch. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Shaw,
Yes.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley.
Yes.
Motion is approved. There's no unfinished business. No notices of motion. Confirming bylaw being bylaw number 2022-45 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the meeting held June 20th, 2022 be read a first, second, third time, signed by the mayor and the clerk, and the corporate seal attached thereto. Moved by Deputy Mayor Graham, seconded by Councillor Huntley. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
and Councillor Shaw.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Huntley and Deputy Mayor Graham. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Shaw,
Yes.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.